Okay, thank you, TCTV. I see that we are live streaming on TCTV channel 8. I see that we are recording. And I'm just waiting for the YouTube notification. All right, I see that we are also live. I turn down my volume on that, live on YouTube. Good evening, the time is now 7 p.m. I'm Chairman Mike Curry, and I'd like to call this joint meeting of the Select Board and Advisory Committee to order on this 15th day of March 2021. I would now invite the chair of the advisory committee or the acting chair of the advisory committee to call to order as well.
Hi, this is Debbie Wilder, acting as the chair of the advisory committee. As I'm the clerk, I would like to call the advisory committee meeting to order, please.
Great. Thank you very much, Debbie. Please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Before we begin, I'd like to state for the record that not only are we being streamed live on TCTV Cable Station 8 and our YouTube web platform, but this evening's recording will be available for later viewing on our YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for all notifications for our town's meetings, televised meetings. Okay, just want to go through a roll call. We did have a quorum for both the select board and the advisory committee. Looks like we've got Adam LaMontagne, Bev Bartolomeo, Terry Griffiths, Sheila Harity, Tim Toth, Tammy Crockett, Jeff Bennett, Bob May, Holly Young, our executive assistant, Will Spring, Chris Casavant, Dr. Casavant, Deb Wilder, chairman of the school committee, the district school committee, Margaret Hughes. And as always, we have our TCTV crew with us, helping us along the way as they have in the remote environment that we've been in. So welcome to everybody. As always, our agenda for this evening has been set no later than 48 hours out by law. It is publicly available at the official source for town information, templetonma.gov. Although I have the discretion as chairperson to add and remove from the agenda, it has been set to allow for time, personnel resources, and public awareness. I reserve the right to move agenda items around to best fit our business and guests. Public participation and comment is still possible via the chat section of the live stream on YouTube. I and TCTV do monitor that chat section as many of you could do the same as following along. And we will address comments and questions as they appear or when appropriate. Remember, this chat area is part of the permanent record, so if it's not already apparent, please state your name as you would during town meeting, as most YouTube names are informal. Just to let you know that the live chat is about 10 to 20 seconds behind the live meeting. I am aware of that, and we will circle back if we need to, if I don't catch something before we move on. Zoom rules of the road. You think we would have our merit badge by now. We probably have the longest running Zoom meeting. I think our Saturday Zoom meeting was 9 hours long. But just to review a couple of the etiquette for Zoom, please use video when possible. Although if you are waiting for your agenda item, it's best to have the video off. Please use the mute feature when not speaking. Although if we see that you might have your mute off when you don't intend to, that means TCTV can go in and mute you. But it is easier for you to control your own button. And if you wish to speak, you may use the raise hand feature, which if you're familiar with Zoom is down at the bottom under reactions. All you need to do is just click that and it automatically goes to the top of my window and I'll call on you. You can always use your hand to signal that you wish to speak, or if you're on the phone, all you need to do is just politely break in if you wish to speak. If you do wish to have material shared on the screen, or I'm sorry, in the screen, please request that of me. This will help everyone stay synchronized and be helpful to the viewing public. Those with 70-inch television screens at home, they'll see the big picture. And if you do need to share, if you need the ability to share, you can ask TCTV to make you a co-host, and we can take care of that. Okay, with all that out of the way, our agenda for this evening is we're going to start off with our team from Monty Tech, and then we're going to go into the Narragansett Regional School District. I believe that will be in a hearing format. Adam and Holly, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I do see that we have it listed as a hearing on the agenda, so I will open it as a hearing if required to, if that's what's appropriate. And then after the budget hearings for both school districts, we will go into some budget follow-up. We had some due-outs that we need to address. And then Adam will go over the warrant and policy review to finish up the meeting. Okay, Adam or Holly, is this a budget hearing? I mean, they've already had their budget hearings. Ours is more of an informational presentation, so I just want to make sure that I'm acting appropriately.
It's a workshop.
It's a workshop. Okay. Then, without further ado, I would turn over the floor to Mrs. Sheila Harity, Superintendent Sheila Harity, and Tammy Crockett for the Monty Tech budget plan. Good evening, ladies.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate
Absolutely.
it. So we've put together a few slides to go through some high points of our school and student accomplishments, and then Tammy will go through the budget line items for your review.
Okay.
So,
Oops, Dr. Harity, I just want to stop you that this is not the correct PowerPoint.
It's the second one, Mike. Fiscal year 22. That one.
That's actually the budget, but we do have a PowerPoint that Julie sent you, Adam.
If someone sends it to me quick, we can react to that pretty quick. When we identified it before, it only took Adam about 30 seconds to get it to me.
well, while we're doing that, at least I can start because
Sure.
some of my pieces are just talking points anyways. So an update in regards to our school year. Certainly this has been like no other, that's for sure. And we were able to, even though we had to close the school last March for the rest of the last year, school year, we worked through the spring and the summer, worked with our union, our facilities director, our school committee, and so forth. And we created an MOA that we're able to open our building at the beginning of the school year with 50% of our students coming to school every day. At Monty Tech, there's a academic and vocational week so that the students, just for simplicity, half of our 1,400 students are scheduled for academics. The other half is in their vocational area. So we created a model where our vocational students came in 3 days a week and had 2 days of remote. And during the academic time, their week, they came in 2 days a week and then had remote 3 days with their instructors. So every single day we had 700 students in our classroom, and we were actually able to use our second gymnasium for the vocational lunches and be able to create the proper social distancing in both the academic and technical areas. Very proud of our teachers and their commitment to coming back to school. As you can imagine, pretty hard to teach, say, electrical with your pots and pans from the kitchen. Right. We really needed the students back in our schools so that they could have the hands-on learning that they need to develop the skills, especially in their vocational area. In addition, when we were starting to think about how to come back for school, many of our teachers, because they're from this region and there was no set hybrid model, they ended up trying to figure out, they would come to us saying, well, my children need to be home on, say, like a Tuesday, Thursday.
Mhm.
Another teacher would come and say, well, my children are only going to school in the mornings. So Tammy and I were left scratching our head saying, how are we going to possibly staff our school now that we've created the MOA? Well, every time we saw the governor at his press conference, he challenged educational leaders as well as Commissioner Riley to think outside the box. And that's exactly what we did. We partnered with the Boys and Girls Club, reached out to Donata Martin, their executive director, and asked if she would be willing to partner with us to create a program at our school for our employees' children. So for the days that their children were home, they could bring them to work and be part of the Boys and Girls Club. We gave them a whole designated area in the auditorium for their space, so they could take their remote classes at Monty Tech and have the supervision that they needed. But in addition to that, they were able to have phys ed, STEM activities, be able to get food from our cafeteria and so forth to really support many of our teachers. At our high point, we had about 24 students in the program Monday through Friday, just during our high school times. So the next slide after that, so I've just went through the first slide, now we can move to the second. In addition, Tammy has worked really hard, so that one additional slide after that. Tammy and our, thank you, and our cafeteria director, as well as our administrative team, worked very hard reaching out to our families and being able to work with them to offer the USDA plan for free breakfast and lunch for any of our families that needed food because of the COVID pandemic. Unfortunately, as you're probably aware, many people have lost their jobs and were in need. And it was wonderful to be able to tap into this benefit of the USDA, where we were serving approximately 400 students that signed up for the program, both breakfast and lunch. In addition, throughout this pandemic, we were fortunate in some regards because our school committee had supported our one-to-one initiative that we had brought to them 5 years ago. And so Monty Tech had a one-to-one Chromebook rollout where our teachers had already received extensive professional development. But not only that, our 1,400 students had already been using the Chromebooks for 4 years in their classrooms, in their shops, and using them at home. So when we were able to, had to shift to the remote learning, that they had the abilities and the skills, we just had to kick it up about 100 notches, knowing that it was fully remote. But we needed to use some of the additional COVID grant dollars to update and upgrade our technology so that we could help facilitate the students' learning. So we purchased 12 new smart boards. We increased our bandwidth. We purchased 45 additional devices to help teachers that had end-of-life Chromebooks and so forth. So many different pieces of equipment now we have it in place to be able to support our students' learning. And last but not least, before I hand it off to Tammy, we always write an enormous amount of grants to help offset our budget and try to keep up with the latest and greatest equipment and technology that is needed. And we were successful in securing 3 different competitive grants. The first is the Safe and Supportive Schools for $10,000, which is the next slide. And what this was, even if we wanted to make sure, especially during COVID, that we were supporting our students, both socially and emotionally. It's been a very trying time for everyone, but we certainly wanted to reach out to our students and their families, as well as our faculty and staff, to work with them on this grant application. We're actually going to use the information from this year and actually put pieces of this in our district improvement plan that we're creating over the summer. In addition, we received $323,000 from Mass Skills Capital Grant to help support our culinary arts program, our school cafeteria, and our greenhouse, and also our continuing ed program for the evening, where we have 1,700 adults in our training and retraining program. And lastly, our Career Tech initiative, we received $125,000, and this is through the North Central Career Center, the Mass Hire program, where again, we're able to offer our continuing ed students at no cost a 250-hour training program in the HVAC industry to help support the workforce pipeline and the needs in our region. And with that, I'd like to then hand it off to Tammy, where she'll go through the nuts and bolts of our budget.
Thank you, Dr. Harity.
Thank you. So I'll be starting on the next slide. I like to give an overview of what's going on with the House One governor's budget, because so much of what's driven here drives the Monty Tech budget, because we're so close to our required net school spending that this really dictates our spending levels. So the preliminary FY22 is projected to be approximately 198 million over FY21 in terms of Chapter 70 state aid. And they're supporting the Student Opportunity Act this year. They were going to do it last year before the pandemic hit, but this will be the first year, and it's a 7-year phase in. And what they're doing is they're increasing foundation budget rates in the 5 areas that you see on the slide, and they're increasing employee benefits rate at an inflation rate higher than the normal inflation rate. And all the other foundation budget rates were increased by 1.41%. Well, that's kind of a lot of wording. On the next slide, it'll make more sense to what I talk about with the foundation budget rates. Sorry, this is a little hard to see, but each grade level gets a foundation rate that is set by the state for different categories. For administrative spending, instructional leadership, you can see the categories across. So when I talk about 5 foundation budget categories that are getting increases to them above the regular, this is what I refer to. And what this does is this drives the minimum per pupil spending for each grade level. It sets the base for it. So for vocational education, if you slide out a little bit, you'll see that going down the grades based on the grade levels, vocational is at the top of the per pupil spending list, because vocational education is the most expensive kind of education. So the base rate is higher than that of the other grade levels. The other items you see there, special ed, ELs, those are all amounts of money that you get above your base. And the special ed in district and tuitioned out is a percentage. So it's never close to what the school district actually has in it. For special ed students, it's an assumed percentage for vocational districts and non-vocational districts. In the other topics, the other ones are low income group. And again, those are additional monies that school districts get based on their low income population. If you go to the next slide, you see how all of these numbers come together to represent Monty Tech's spending. So we're all vocational. So we're in column 7. All of our students, foundation enrollment, 1,461. Now that is not just the students coming to Monty Tech. Foundation enrollment is students that live in our member district communities that attend Monty Tech. Then it's students that live in our member district communities that attend another vocational school, otherwise known as school choice, as well as students who are enrolled in our Chapter 74 practical nursing program. So that's what makes up the 1,461. And going down, lines 1 through 11, the previous slide kind of shows how each number has come about. It has a rate for administration that gets multiplied by the 1,461 and so forth and so on all the way down. Then to the right, I discussed the additional numbers that you get above the base, and special ed in district. Again, this is where it's only an assumed percentage. So this is kind of a bone of contention area for school districts, because it looks like we have 70 special ed in district students, when in fact we have 204. But again, it's an assumed percentage, and you can see by the legend down in the bottom left where these percentages come from. So for us, for vocational schools, it's a 4.82%. Then moving across the top, ELs also get additional bumps, and we have 15 EL students, and you could see the rates on the previous screen per cost category to come up with those. And then low income, the bottom right, very bottom right of this in blue, it says how they come up with the low income determination for each school district. And they take the higher of the two options that they use. So for us, the number's 452. And that's, again, you get an additional bump for that. That drives our foundation budget of $25,842,191, divided out by the number of foundation enrollment pupils. That brings us to $17,688 per pupil. That's the required minimum spending. So that does not include debt service, transportation, and capital.
Yep.
The next slide will show you the breakdown of our Chapter 70. So the right begins with what we're receiving this year. You just saw how our foundation budget was calculated. Then the state takes into account all of our communities, the 18 that belong to Monty Tech. They add it up to what each community's required minimum contribution is, and that's where they get the $10,450,136, and they subtract them, and that should be what our Chapter 78 is. Well, you can see that's less than what we're receiving this year. So they hold us harmless in the sense that they won't decrease your Chapter 70. But instead of getting any additional Chapter 70, we're just getting the state minimum, which they give to every school district, of $30 per pupil. So you can see this year, our Chapter 70 increase is $43,830 for a total of $15,489,639. Moving over to the right, it kind of puts everything in a nice little snapshot picture. You can see our foundation budget, the required district contribution. I really want to point this out because I think it's really important. The required district contribution went up by $512,700 to support the increase to our required net school spending. So you can see that last number, our requirement for our minimum spending of students went up in total by $556,530. And the state is only funding that with an additional $43,830. So the rest of it is being, as I say, put on the backs of our communities to fund. And the increase is largely due to the Student Opportunity Act increases to foundation budget. The next slide is something very new this year and kind of, I don't want to call it controversial, but I guess it could be. This is the use of ESSER funds. Now, what those are is elementary, secondary education emergency relief funds. These are federal stimulus dollars coming to school districts. There's, we had ESSER 1, which we received this year. And Dr. Harity told you earlier, we spent a lot of that on our technology updates and increases, as well as we've gotten some other COVID-related grants to do the PPE purchases, etc. So on December 27th of 2020, the feds voted to give another round of this federal stimulus money to school districts. Well, excuse me, what the governor did of Massachusetts in his FY22 budget, he wrote in the Chapter 70 language that school districts were required to use up to 75% of their total ESSER allotment to offset any increases to communities in their required minimum contributions. So I hope that makes sense. The next slide will really break that down for you. So we'll go to Templeton. So reading across, you went from 88 students to 89 in the foundation enrollment. The required minimum went from 549,452 to 603,992, or an increase in your required minimum contribution of 54,540. Over on the right-hand side is where we have the ESSER allocations. So in the upper right-hand box, you'll see that our district's total ESSER allocation is approximately 652,000. That's what we're going to get in this federal stimulus dollars. We could use up to 75% of that, or 488,000, to offset the increases to communities who had an increase in the required minimum. So if a community, let's say like on this example, Barry, they went down, they don't get to use any of our ESSER dollars. But for Templeton, going across, the state has said Templeton represents 6% of our ESSER allocation that can be used to decrease the required minimum contribution. That would be 28,255. Because that number is less than or equal to the amount of your increase this year, we can use the entire 28,255 towards a decrease to your required minimum contribution this year. A couple of the caveats. This is one-time funding. This is one-time funding use. So you're already going to start your assessment to Monty Tech in FY23 with a funding cliff, because we don't know these monies are going to be here again. So that's one, I guess, word of caution that I'd like to put out communities, just to keep that in the back of their minds. But our school committee very strongly wanted to be sure all these funds were used for the communities to decrease the requirement, as they should be.
Yep, we got that memo.
Yes, thank you. And I got the letter from Adam that you guys voted to accept that.
That's correct.
The next slide is our budget summary for this year. So our proposed FY22 budget is $29,114,049, or approximately $300,000 increase, which represents 1.04% increase. And most of that is due to our, as you can see, net school spending requirement. That's what's driving that budget increase. You can see the Chapter 78, the ESSER dollars that we just discussed, going down, transportation and other operating. This is where we have our contracted transportation. We have 30 buses, as well as any amounts over our net school spending requirement. So you'll see above our proposal of spending $600,714 above net school spending. That represents 2.3% above our requirement. We try to always keep it as close as possible to our requirement without being detrimental to the school. We're putting in our estimated transportation dollars. Regional transportation, you see that this year we're using $350 FY21, nothing yet in FY22. It's because the school committee votes to put whatever we receive for transportation aid above what we budgeted for in the budget into the regional transportation revolving fund, which is then in turn used to offset the following year's assessments for our communities. Well, we don't know if we're getting additional money above the transportation aid that we budgeted this year, which if you look in the 21 column is $1,511,000. But anything that we receive above that amount, the committee will vote to use in the regional transportation fund. And you'll see that as an offset when they put together the final budget, which usually comes later, like September, October. Or sometimes later, like this year. We didn't have a state budget till January. So the The district is also proposing between this category and the next category to use $450,000 of our E&D. And I do have a slide that talks to you about that with the balances. And this leaves total assessments of all the communities of $11,278,600, or a 2.69% from the current year. So you could see as well, without the use of those ESSER dollars of almost $300,000, with a very slight increase to the budget, this would have been a $600,000 increase to all of our communities with a 1% budget increase. So it's good we had the ESSER dollars to use, but you know, it'll be interesting to see what the state does in FY23 to help with that funding cliff.
Right.
The next slide will show you a breakdown of the assessments. So again, you can see Templeton foundation enrollment 89, foundation budget 1,574,233. That is literally the 17,688 we saw earlier per pupil times 89. The required minimum is what the state calculated based on Templeton's ability to pay, and I've provided those slides next. Subtracting out the ESSER 2 allocation, then taking Templeton's percentage proportionate share of our transportation and operating section after the revenues are backed out, and the capital apportionment. So it brings to a total assessment, proposed assessment of $638,780, which is a $32,661 increase from the current year. The next slide, I won't get into crazy detail, but this is the state's. This is how they determine what they call your ability to pay. So they use this for every community in the state, property value and income. They use the percentages for every community in the state, and they come up with your ability to pay, which is line 7, called combined effort yield. So the state has determined that Templeton could pay $5.6 million towards their schools, towards the foundation budgets of the schools. Line 8 is the total foundation budgets that are representative of Templeton between Narragansett and Monty Tech. The maximum a town could pay is 82.5% of it, because even those who can far exceed their payments, the state is still giving 17.5% state aid. So you can see your target share is 5.5. Going over to the right, your current FY21 required local contribution is $5,213,519. They multiply that, the Department of Revenue calculates out your municipal revenue growth factor, and they come up with a preliminary contribution for 22, which is $5,407,462. This is below what they think you could pay. So they bring you down to the bottom half of the sheet. It's 189,000 short, or 1.34%. But because it doesn't meet the shortfall thresholds, they're not adding anything to your payment this year beyond what they've already calculated, $5,407,462. On the next slide, you'll see how that's separated out between Gansett and Monty Tech. So the top is just FY21, the bottom half is FY22. So you can see the two schools and the foundation budgets, 12 million in one. Monty Tech represents 11.17% of the total foundation budgets. So they take your ability to pay $5,407,462, put that percentage to what each district represents, and that's how they come up with what the required contribution is to each regional district for Templeton. So you can see Monty Tech 603,992. So that's how that is calculated. The next slide is showing you a comparison of the 2 years of assessments. So you can see that the largest component of Templeton's assessment to Monty Tech is the required minimum contribution. And it would have been, well, $29,000 higher without the use of the ESSER funding this year. So I just think that's important to point out. So taking that all the way across, you can see that this year, Templeton's assessment per pupil out of Templeton's tax base is $7,177 per pupil. It's just the number of pupils divided out by the total assessment. The next slide is kind of an analysis by function, comparisons from 21 to 22 of our spending priorities. So some of the significant changes or increases or decreases are our district technology. We're planning to move a lot of things that we have servers housed internally. We're making them virtual servers. They'll hold more, it'll be easier, and it works in this remote world. Increases to contractual agreements, and we are planning to recall a couple of staff that were laid off this year that we did not call back because we were not fully open, and that's on another slide. Some significant increases you'll see is to textbooks and instructional materials and instructional technology. We plan to put a lot of those expenses into our ESSER 2 grant, the component that's not used to offset community assessments, because that's what those grants are intended.
Right.
Pupil transportation, again, that's contractual. We're also taking some money out of maintenance because we can also use those grants for that. And employee benefits, as always, health insurance, we've estimated at an increase of 5%. The next slide, as I told you earlier, talks about our E&D. So our E&D balance, June 30th, was $1,287,000, or 4.5%. And the proposal is to use $450,000 of that to reduce FY22 assessments. The other number down here is every year the school committee has been voting to put approximately $30,000 into the stabilization fund. And so this is where the balance is. And we're going to be using this. The school committee tries to keep their capital budget to $300,000 every year. So we try to do the maintenance and the capital improvements to fit in that amount. But we do know we have some more significant items to do coming down the pike that are in the $500,000 range. So we're trying to fund this up slowly so that we do not have to have a spike to communities for a capital piece. The next slide shows you the staffing I referred to. So we had one vocational teacher that laid off that we will recall because we'll be opening in full. We had another vocational teacher that retired that we did not fill their position. Another instructor has been on a grant for 3 years, so we need to move that person into the general fund. We had a support staff layoff that we're recalling, and we're putting the school resource officer back into our budget that we had to cancel the contract with the city for last year because we didn't think it was a priority in the budgeting with all the potential cuts. The next goal and initiative is putting together, as Dr. Harity said earlier, the Safe and Supportive School Grant that's going to help us dictate some changes we can, or initiatives we can start to help foster, this emotional health and well-being for our students and our staff. So we plan to develop those initiatives next year.
Kim,
yes.
A question. So on the social emotional health, is that above the ESSER requirement for minimum spending? Are you fulfilling it with the ESSER funds, or is that another grant? Because I know that there were strings attached to the ESSER 2 funds where you had to spend a minimum of 10.
Yes, so a minimum of 10, but we'll be going above that. So we'll be using 10 from the grant, and this will come from our general fund budget.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. The next component on the next slide, something huge that I know you'll be hearing, is student supplemental learning support. So again, we're really enhancing our summer programs, our after school programs, our before school tutoring. We're going to be putting in a lot of supports to kind of help offset some of the learning slides that have happened over this past year and a half. Another item or goal and initiative with this general fund budget is we're writing for a Mass Life Science grant. And with that, there is updates that we need to make to our science classrooms, much needed updates, as well as some other items in our capital improvement plan. Is we're replacing our main building generator, which I think is actually older than our school building. I think they built the building around the generator, but it's really old, sorry. And so we're replacing it in 2 phases, some this year and some next year, because it is a rather significant price tag.
Right.
Also, HVAC, we're fortunate that we did the HVAC system redo 7 years ago with the performance contract, because that saved us this year with bringing teachers and students back to school, because we have great air filtration systems. But it's time, we need to have the system rebalanced, and we are planning to do a bunch of control upgrades, as well as our fire alarm panel, which again, I think is from the 70s with the building, which needs updating. And again, the fire alarm, we're doing in phases as well, because this is projected to be all in total about a $400,000 item. You may recall we came to the towns last year and talked about a facilities assessment that we had done by an outside firm. And all of these upgrades are what they were considered high, medium, or high, however we could work them into their facilities assessment. So we're working right from that. The last slide is, I always like to show you where we compare to other vocational schools in the state. So this is based on FY19 per pupil expenditures, which was updated in February. And I sort it from the highest per pupil expenditure down to, as I call, the most efficient per pupil expenditure. So you can see where Monty Tech is. We're definitely in the lower third in spending per pupil at $19,770 per pupil. So I feel like we're doing the best we can and trying to keep our expenses down for our communities. And that is it. I'll be happy to answer questions. Hope I didn't just ramble too much.
No, I was able to get a question in. I know that there, since it's a joint meeting, we've got select board and advisory committee. Just one question for either of you. The budget presentation, whether we can make it available, is this already available on your website?
The actual budget is available on our website.
Okay.
Yep, the presentations I tailor to each community.
Yeah. Okay. I know since a lot of it was fine print, I tried to zoom in as much as possible, but at least we were able to talk to those things. But if any of the public wanted to inspect it, at least they'd be able to get a copy of the budget from the website to follow along with that. I will, anyone from the select board or advisory, any questions for either Dr. Harity or for Tammy? Okay, Dr. Harity, Tammy, I do not see any hands up for questions. So thank you very much for joining us this evening. I'm not sure if you had any other slides or anything else that you wanted. Okay, great.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Thank you once again
Have a good
for
evening.
having us.
Great job. Great job.
Thank you.
I'm like speechless, ladies. Honestly, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Nice presentation.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, thanks. Have a good night.
You as well.
All right, let's see. I'm going to pull back from full screen on that. Adam, I did get the email. Next on our agenda is the Narragansett Regional School District. It looks like we've got Dr. Casvant and Margaret Hughes, the chair from the school committee. Good evening, Madam Chairman, Dr. Casvant. Great to have you with us.
Great, good evening.
Good evening. Just for the record, we're having a little bit of bandwidth issue. So I actually have Anne Marie Geister with me here. So in the district where I'm keeping the picture off because I'm afraid I'm getting that unstable picture.
Mm-hmm.
So if I don't, either way, I just want to make sure folks know that I do have Anne Marie here, but I don't want to drop off the call or off the meeting. So I want to make sure that I just let everyone know that. But thank you very much for inviting me, or us for that matter. I think that you have the PowerPoint. Okay, great.
Yep. Yes, I do.
So, our presentation will be a little bit more homegrown, obviously, and will be, it'll certainly reflect some of not only the items that we're looking towards, I guess, for FY22, but certainly we've tailored a few of the slides to some of the questions that came in between, the presentation with the school committee and tonight. So we'll go from there. So what we tried to do, if we could just go to the next slide. I know that folks have discussed and have seen this, or many of you have, but we decided really to give a summary up first, and almost basically telling the end of the book before anyone reads it. But what we plan to do is we'll take all available funding resources to adequately fund the FY22 budget. And we use E&D as the example of that, but certainly there are other items that we use, in its entirety in order to fund the budget. We have not added additional staff through the general fund, although there will be a considerable increase to class sizes and the elementary level. And I say that for two reasons. One, in terms of the general fund budget, we did not add any staff members, but given the ESSER grants and the needs that go with COVID, we certainly do have extra bodies throughout the buildings, but are paid through the grants that everyone obviously had to utilize in terms of giving appropriate staffing, PPE, et cetera. We were able to maintain level service because of various COVID grants. We talked about that. And one of the reasons is that utilizing ESSER 2 funds, the shortfall this year was $188,000, which will be covered by CARE 2 funds. And we'll get into that as we go through the PowerPoint. Have the next slide, please. Excuse me. So what are the needs? So right off the bat, what we figured is that the high school science teacher, we needed one of them. We needed to hire one, or at least post for one, to expand Project Lead the Way program at no additional cost to the district. And we'll also tell you how we met each of these needs in a few. Ensure that all academic and special needs services remain intact. Special needs services, as you heard from our friends from Monty Tech and across not only the state, but in this area, is one of our largest drivers in terms of cost. HVAC upgrades needed to be advanced to a more technological monitoring system, but not only that, they needed to be upgraded to make sure that ventilation was working properly. The good news is that mechanically our HVAC system here at the middle high school was in good shape, but it did need some upgrades to make sure that the outside air CFMs were meeting the appropriate levels. The class size reduction at the elementary school, which we will talk about, and address learning gaps and social emotional needs related to COVID. Many of the grants, well, certainly ESSER 2, and what we think will be the focus of the grant that we hear that is coming our way is to address gaps, of course, and HVAC primarily. So we've made a move to that. So how did we fill a high school science teacher of physics? Well, we actually had a teacher in the district that really filled a couple of roles all at one time. Not only was he a music teacher by trade, but he was also able to teach some math, and he taught physics. So it was a nice use of resources. That teacher moved on. And what we were left with, quite frankly, was a gaping hole in the physics department and in the music department. So what we decided to do was to take a music teacher from the middle school and spread music out throughout all three levels, but then use those monies to hire a physics teacher. Again, the science department was down and has been down a teacher for quite some time, and physics is a key component to graduation, especially for those students who are looking for more of a science, a science curriculum. Not only that, but jobs moving into the future. So ultimately, that's how we fix that issue without adding any additional bodies. We reorganized special education delivery. That has been something that we have been working on for the last 4 years, mostly in the area of the social emotional learning. So as staff either left, retired, etc., what we did is we took those funds and we utilized them in the way of hiring school psychologists, because testing is very expensive. And if you were to go outside, or maybe get a school psychologist per diem, it is very, very expensive. And so not only that, they're able to do actual counseling, which is a major need, especially at the younger levels. HVAC, we explored opportunities with both towns. This is the goal through the Green Community Program, as well as anticipate grant opportunities through the federal government. So we want to explore those opportunities. But I think that when we talk about this a little bit later, we did quite a bit of work this year. Again, kudos to our custodial staff who have kept these units in very good condition, although they're getting on in years. To address class size, we are obviously going to use care funds to reduce that. Much of this has to do with, with the 3 foot and the 6 foot distancing rules. But beyond that, it's a concern which we will speak to. And we need to expand our summer school programs, not only to address gaps in learning, but obviously it's a focus of the new, what we think are going to be the new grants that are coming down the line, but very, very important as we make sure that COVID didn't take as high of a toll as it possibly could through summer programming. So next slide, please. So we think, and as we've tried to endeavor to fix our issues without adding staff or resources, we noticed, and of course this is COVID related, is that as soon as we started to talk about school coming back to school back in July and August actually, we had to identify 3 different plans, as everyone knows. We had to do a plan if we were in full, we had to do a plan if we were hybrid, and do a plan if we were full remote. Those surveys came back, they were a resounding to the tune of about 70% or a little under that at the time, wanting their children in school. And this is back again before school even started. So, but there were quite a few students, especially at the younger levels, whom their parents decided to take them out of public education. And so we did see an increase in students going to, say, Holy Family Academy, but specifically, we saw quite a few students going to be homeschooled, which we'll talk about. So October 1 is the big number. It's the number that drives enforcement, as everyone knows. We were hopeful that that actual number would have been later in the year, because we knew that once parents saw that we could be safe, we could educate students within the COVID pandemic, that they would come back, and they most certainly did. But that was not the case. So I wanted to just kind of highlight for you that when you see the elementary pre-K at 569, and then when we took another snapshot in February of 586, obviously that's a plus 17. I think it's important to realize that these are move-ins. These are not students or students coming back, maybe being not homeschooled, pardon me, school choice in other districts, but that does not count or take into account students whom were being homeschooled. So that was something that caught our eye. You'll also see that we had 420 high schoolers in October and 414, which, one might think that either students dropping out or maybe moving. And actually, 4 of those students were in our intensive special needs classroom, and they actually aged out of the program at 22. And 2 of them and the other 2 had moved. So we saw a very stable student population, and obviously some growth over just a few months from October to February. Next slide, please. So this required us to look at this. Quite frankly, we've never really done a lot of work looking into homeschool. It's about 24 students, and I will tell you anecdotally that many of our homeschool students prior to COVID were known to us. They were the same families. So it wasn't unusual to see maybe a family of 4 or 5, even greater, that would just apply to be homeschool students. So, but then FY21 COVID, and we saw a sharp increase, of 63 students, and that was something that this is just at the elementary level, mind you, and we were close to 100 district wide. Which again, we were around 46 district wide, and now we're over, close to 100. So what we did is I wanted to just highlight this, is that many of the students whom were homeschooled by their parents, you have to literally unenroll. So in order to homeschool, you unenroll from the district. You are your own district, so to speak. Many, if not all of it, especially the elementary parents, asked if this would somehow affect them coming back into the district. And of course it doesn't, because they are residents of either Phillipston or Templeton. And so at any time they could re-enroll. And as a matter of fact, many of them made the comment that they would be re-enrolling once they felt more comfortable with COVID. Well, if you follow the color on the top table, you see that, and I've graduated these kids. So, 2 was about the norm, and all of a sudden the following year when they're first grade, there's next thing there's 12, and then FY22 projected looks to be 12. So when you look off to the right, you start seeing that that some of these are plus 10 students who were here July 1. When I say here, they were enrolled in our district, and then COVID, obviously, and concerns with that, they brought them to, they unenrolled them to homeschool. Now, I am not saying in any, by any means that we know that July 1, they're all going to come streaming back. I have no idea. I will tell you that to date, I believe out of the grant of elementary, I think it's 8 at this point in time. And so as the commissioner has indicated to come back full time, 5 days a week, that has spurred a lot of interest in re-enrolling into the district, although they were here just say in July. That it concerns us because when you look down below, if those students who were already enrolled in these classes anyway, grades, pardon me, and with the 4 teachers at each level, you start seeing some numbers. Some pretty high numbers, pardon me, 25, 30, 28, and 28. Now, let me say this. This is not the first time that anyone from Templeton or Phillipston has heard this. I've publicly stated that this is exactly what the votes over the last couple of years has, in fact, driven. Democracy works for those whom, attend or show up. This should be very known to the parents of students who may have elementary students. I bring this up because it's going to play into the conversation as we prepare to open up in COVID later on, in a few more slides. So if you could go to the next slide, please.
Yep. Before we, do you mind taking questions along the way?
I will take any questions. Sorry, I can't see if there are questions, so absolutely.
Yeah, and I'll definitely help with that, Dr. C. My question is options for kids in the communities for pure online schools. I think one of them is called TECA, TECCA.
Yes.
If a kid in the district chooses, or the family chooses to go into an online alternative, does that count as homeschool, or how is that factored into school choice?
That's factored into school choice, and it's a good question because folks do get confused at times about that. So from a funding standpoint, technically speaking, we actually receive funds for students who school choice to other districts, given whatever the rate is, the foundation rate is. But when they homeschool, technically speaking, you do not receive funding for them. But I will just, as you heard from Monty Tech, we're held harmless, meaning that we, technically receive funds above and beyond the number through the foundation rate. So it wouldn't affect us, say, as dramatically or as quickly as a district who was not held harmless. But to your point, those schools whom do remote learning as their instructional model, they are considered school choice, although I will also say they get a higher rate than, say, your typical district, which I think is interesting, but that's just.
Thanks.
So we always talk about school choice because it is a major funding source for us. We saw a dramatic decline in school choice receiving, and this is a direct result of not only feedback that we received from towns, from both our member towns, but it also reflects a change in the policy or procedures from the state. The state put out just before, it was 2 years ago, they put out an FAQ, a pretty extensive FAQ. And what was a common thing, and folks have heard me talk about this before, school choice in place. So if you have a student who's their family lives in Templeton and they move, they would approach us back in the day and say, can my child please stay here? We love the district. We're just going to move. And we would say, sure, that's a great thing because we'll just receive school choice monies for that. Well, that has not been the case for the last, say, year and a half. If they move out, and of course we know that because they have to records have to be sent, we would then contact the parent and look for what was a reasonable break, in service, so to speak, and to transition them to their new district. So, for example, if it was April 3rd and someone moved, we would wait till April vacation. We wouldn't just simply tell them to leave immediately. It just isn't the right thing to do. But not only that, we haven't replaced any school choice students, with the exception of 6 that were grandfathered, so to speak, from the pre-K into K, but we did not replace the number of school choice students that, say, graduated. And this is a conversation we've had a lot. Generally, what I would do is try to replace the number of students whom left. And in the grades that could fit them. Plus, the elementary and the middle school cannot fit any more students, period, in terms of school choice, or they're pretty full. So what did we see? Well, we were very concerned because we knew the number of kids either who were moving or certainly graduating and moving on. But an interesting thing also happened is that our sending numbers are lower than they've ever been. So, quite frankly, this probably has a lot to do with COVID, just given the number of kids who didn't move on as per normal, although we have been in decline in that area for some time. But, people just really stayed kind of put. So our differential was the lowest it's been, well, since the 5 or 6 years I've been here. And that always equates to money. And if you could move to the next slide, please, Adam or Mike. So this is familiar to you. So we always look at the difference, the differential, the receiving tuition versus the sending tuition, and what, and then what, over a couple FYs, what, the differential is. So it's the lowest we've had in some time. So, and we could move on unless anyone have any questions. So how is our school choice spent? Again, we've talked quite a bit about this. We still have 9 teaching positions in there. You know, and this was done with on or about FY14, I think, or 13, 14. But the other large expense is the health insurance. The district's portion of the health insurance is paid out of that. That is, you know, a very dangerous, you know, endeavor. I've talked about it quite a bit. It's there. It's been there for about the same time that the teaching positions were put in there at some point. But right now we're above water, right? So we take in more money than we lose. But as you look at the next slide, we did some projections. So to several members' points about one-time funds and what can, you know, what can be devastating is we did a little projection. Again, you know, we have to project these things, but if you look at losing roughly 30 school choice students each year and you don't replace them, and you take the liberty of just using some of our, you know, some average numbers, you quickly find out that within, you know, within 3 or 4 years, you'll be upside down. So if you don't replace it, those costs, you know, you start losing money. So you're underwater. You're losing more money than you're taking in, and this can happen very, very quickly. And so this is the type of, you know, one of our goals, right, is to reduce our need on school choice for these items. But that means that somehow through the general fund, that in terms of monies are going to have to be replaced. So I wanted to make sure I put this slide in here because it's important for all of us to, of course, be aware of. So next slide, or questions, or so we get into the actual budget for us, and when we start looking in terms of general fund, you know, we have the accounts descriptions, and I try to go over them as best I can. You know, certainly the 1000s are larger area for there is for software. When folks say, well, what did you buy with one-time monies? We bought a lot of software this year, like a lot of districts did, Zoom, etc., which was a fairly, you know, well, it's certainly a larger increase than normal. When we look at, for example, looking at some of the other areas, other school services, we'll talk a lot about this in terms of sped transportation, or transportation in general, but the larger piece was sped transportation. It was a huge increase, which we'll talk about. The other area of benefits, or 5,000 area, is retirement and insurance. We all saw a pretty hefty increases, not only in retirement, but our insurances. And, you know, so we saw some areas that we saw a pretty steep increase in areas that we haven't seen them in a while, to that extent, but also saw, you know, for example, like maintenance, et cetera. We've worked really hard to make sure that we're being proactive rather than reactive in terms of fixes, et cetera. So we were happy to see that some of those numbers had started to see bear the fruits of our labor.
Dr. Casavant, you have a question from Mr. May.
I'm sorry, I didn't see it.
That's okay.
Good evening, Dr. Casavant. My question is basically this on this sheet here. Under your 2000 account, you have the instruction. Your increase compared to fiscal year 21 is 1.28%. So I'm not really hoping, or not really foreseeing that going down any drastic amount in the future. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how we're going to manage our budget with that 500,000 plus increase hitting us square in the face every year when our growth is about half of that in town. I just really need a plan. And we've talked, and I know there's, you know, talk, but I just, you know, if we can't solve that one problem right there, we're in trouble.
Well, I think that, yeah, Bob, I mean, when we get to the, you know, and again, we have talked, and I sent you the answers to the questions, and I apologize they were late, or later than I would like. I think that what you're seeing here, quite frankly, when you look at instruction, which is salary, a 1.28% increase, especially, you know, when you're talking about staff intensive, you know, education is staff intensive, and I'm certainly not going to sit here and say no. Will we see a decrease in the 2000? Well, no, I don't, because cost of living, we're union driven, quite frankly. But I will say that a 1.28% increase, given that, is pretty, I would say, pretty judicial. And I think that we've done a nice job trying to keep that type of cost down.
That's exactly my point, Dr. C, is that the 1.28 is about as low as this is going to get, from what I can tell. So
I think that, yeah, yes and no, right, Bob? I mean, I can't oh God, I would love to. If I could see into the future and know how negotiations would go and contracts, et cetera, I think that is something that would bode well for me if I could do that. But I will tell you that again, I'm going to go back to last year. We did, in fact, we heard the community. It hurt, but we heard the community, in 7 teaching positions plus an administrator. You've heard the whole. We've cut those positions, and we did. And trust me, please don't hear that. Yay for us. I think that's not gonna bode well, I think, in class size if people keep moving in. But again, my point is that we did make those steps to make sure that we keep it as low as possible. And certainly people voted the way they wanted the budget to go, in a sense, right? I mean, that can't be denied. I think that we were all there, and this is the result of that. The people spoke. Those positions were cut. What moves forward from here, I don't know, especially if we keep growing at the elementary level. Now, I want to say this for the record, because I can just hear it later, is that, well, geez, why did you close Phillipston then if you're just growing at such? It's not a space issue. If this was pre-COVID, right, never happened, I'd have 4 teachers per grade with some pretty high class sizes, right? I still have rooms in that building that can be used. I'm talking about TES, right? So my point is that I heard it immediately when we spoke about it the first time. This is not a space issue, right? What I'm talking about is a staffing issue. If in fact class sizes are concerning to the community, okay? So Bob, it's one of those, the Pandora question, how are you going to keep this lower than 1.28? I don't know. But it's pretty low right now, and it's pretty low last year. I don't have an answer for you if I'm to be honest. The plan is to keep, cutting where we can, or making sure that we're as smart as we can in the areas that we can. What I'm going to get to, though, is that these areas that we have no control over is starting to concern me a great deal. And one of those areas is special education, which I will, we're going to get to in a sec, right, in a couple of minutes. And I agree. My job is to try to keep it as low as possible, but to provide the best possible education possible. I don't know where the twain shall meet at some point, but right now, those are the class sizes I see pre-COVID, and we'll talk what COVID looks like, in a little bit here.
I appreciate that. And I don't disagree with you. I realize that this is not a good situation for anybody. And, it's obvious looking at your budget that you have listened, but it's also obvious looking at the budgets that the school budget and the town's revenue are never going to meet.
Yeah.
So it's incumbent upon us to make it meet. It's going to be ugly, but we can't. My concern, and I don't want to get off the subject here, my concern is with all the ESSER funds, the one-time monies, that we're just gonna be, in this, well, basically gonna be looking down at a steamroller coming at us. And I'm just concerned.
I agree with you, Bob. And in my letter, or I'm sorry, in my,
Yes,
my
you
email,
responded real well, Chris. I
I
appreciate
said
that.
that. I mean,
Yes,
it was a nice work, and Tammy and I worked together as business managers years ago, but the financial cliff is a really nice way, to put it, right? And by the
I
way,
agree.
absolutely, but really what it is a steamroller, because when you start getting into these positions of live to, to fight another day, which we're in right now, because, as again, I haven't got to the end of this yet, but they gave us this money in order to make sure that with revenues down, especially for the schools and of course towns as well, that we were able to just do the job that we're supposed to do, right? And it always concerns me when I'm in a sense forced to do that. But let me just get back to your original point. How are we going to do that? We got to work together. We got to figure this out. I mean, I almost want to say FY22 is coming, but I'd rather talk about FY23. Not really, but you know what I'm saying. The sooner the better, because FY23 looms. And again, Adam and I have talked about this, my gosh, for weeks. I don't even know, probably even months about this as we work forward to it. So I see that Bev has her hand up. I now know where to look, so I'll stop.
Thank you, Chris. That's good. Appreciate it.
Hi there, how are you doing?
Good, Bev. How are you?
Well, on top of the ground. So, school choice. You use it for revenue. If we accept a kid, what do we get paid for this child?
Good question. The standard is about $5,000. If they receive any type of special needs service, those are additional monies are paid by the district. So it's roughly $5,000. But if, for sorry.
What does it cost us to educate this child?
Well, you're right. What does it cost? So if you go back to the foundation rate, and you go back again, Tammy showed, and I could pull it up on the Excel spreadsheet, but it's roughly 11,000 and some change is our foundation per pupil rate. But remember something, just so I always say, yep, that's $5,000 in.
I know all this.
I know you do. So you also know that the student who's going school choice out, we're also receiving $5,000.
Yeah.
Or more. No, I'm just saying it does, right.
No, it's just the, I think most people built the school to educate our kids.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of, it's gonna, getting these ESSER funds, if the town does not get more help from the government, this is going to dig a hole so big. And we've been in the hole too many times. I don't want to go back down there. I don't want to go through another year like we did last year. Town meeting was horrible.
Yeah.
It really makes me sick physically, because it's really not a good situation. It really doesn't. I'm really afraid for 23 and 24, because I don't think things are going to bounce back like they think they are. And if I'm wrong, we will all be golden. But if I'm right, it's not going to be good.
I agree. And I would say, and you won't, well, I try not to ever place the blame on anybody but squarely on my shoulder. So I try to stay away from the state's fault, but I have often said it, and everyone knows that the foundation formula period is broken.
Yeah.
The Student Opportunity Act was supposed to fix that, or is supposed to fix. I shouldn't say it like it didn't, but we're like year 4 by the time they get to us in terms of the funds, et cetera. I know that I call it ESSA 3, whatever the new, the other, the next wave is supposed to have some monies for, not some, it's supposed to be directed towards towns, et cetera. $8 billion, but again, it's not in our pockets yet, right, Bev? So, I mean, I'm gonna sit here and say, yeah, that's how we're going to do it, because I don't know it. I don't know it until I do. And so,
You gotta, the trains that they have in Boston, I forgot what it's called. That whole thing, they're in the poorhouse. There are gonna be so many hands sticking out. We ought to really camp on the governor's doorstep because I don't know what's gonna happen, but it's scary. And Bob's right. You know, we do not have enough, even with the new growth. When these people move to town and they send their kids to school, that a lot of that money gets sucked right up. And it hasn't changed, except maybe this year it's probably even going to be worse because of all the other costs that we have. Well, we'll just see where it goes. That's all there is to it. But it's
Bev and Chris, if I could chime in on ESSER. I know that when we had talked about it in the meeting before, much as he does frequently, Mr. May pointed out in our financial management regulation, if we're to even I guess you could say be associated with one-time funds, that we'd better have a plan to get back on track so that we can wean ourselves off of one-time funds. I had specifically spoke to the fact that I agreed with the use of them for what we faced right now, as these were very specific resources. I can tell, I want to help answer the question, Bev and Bob, to be able to say, and I very much appreciate you pointing out very specific things, Mr. May, about like their 2000 account. Adam and I and Dr. Casavant have already tried to combine our efforts to say which tools we are expecting to use over the next few fiscal years to be able to we don't want the cliff. I don't want Bev to walk out of town meeting feeling physically ill, but we're going to do the best that we can to combine our efforts. I think that Chris had already even started to use some tools that we had not considered. And then we have to, like we did our last fiscal year, where we had a couple representatives from the school committee, Phillipston and Templeton, to sit around the table and do some resources sharing, or really have kind of a wargaming meeting to talk about the strategy to not get into something where we're hundreds of thousands of dollars off the mark. What we see right now is less than 200,000 for this year, but it balloons. And as Monty Tech has said, and as the DESI guidance for the use of ESSER funds said, full warning, you cannot take the offset of the ESSER 2 funds within your minimum local contributions for FY23. Knowing all this information helps us develop a strategy to deal with 23. I see on the slide here, you've got level service for FY22. We're already taking a look at changing our budgeting strategy so that we can use any tool that we can to be able to offset the impact of using the one-time monies that the state and our federal and state government have allocated to us. Even just Friday, the American Rescue Act, forget the full forward determination, but they've already allocated how much is going to come out of that per town. And Templeton has something like over 800,000 in one column, and then a total allocation of about 2.3 million to be used all the way out to FY24. We have to determine what the impacts are going to be able to fully come up with that strategy that takes us through 23, 24, 25, and really beyond, because some of these funding sources, as you know, we're like taking a comprehensive look into our out years to say, what is our revenue stream going to be? I know that was a lot, but I just wanted to be able to say that we are working collaboratively with Derek Gansett on strategies for the out years. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, Mike, I just wanted to say, could you, in your future endeavors, could you think about including the finance committees from Phillipston and Templeton in that group? I would appreciate it myself, just for future reference.
In fact, Bob, I'd failed to mention, but Amy was a part, she was the liaison from the advisory committee. I think we had invited the Phillipston Finance Committee. I'm not sure if they ever sent a rep, but Amy was at several of these collaborative meetings where we could discuss strategies. Over.
I will tell you I will say from my point of view, that it was very illuminating, quite frankly. And that was with Carter last year. And we carried that forward with Adam this year in terms of just, of course, we can't meet like we did. So it's been more conversations, over the phone, et cetera. But, it helped, frame a few things differently for me. So, so I found that to be very, very, very helpful. So if there isn't, I'll move on to the next slide. So this is
Mr. Chairman, if I could.
Yep. Do you, sure.
I have a question on the school choice page that showed $10,000 payment for Gilman Waite. So Gilman Waite Field, as it's called on the deed, is town property. So I'm looking at this as a legal entity wanting to give Templeton a $10,000 gift. And if that is so, if we are going to follow our financial management policies of the town, that would need to come before the Board of Selectmen as a separate item for debate whether we want to accept that gift or not. I don't believe that's proper in the school budget because I know there's a thing in there that says students of the high school of Templeton gets preference, but it is a town-owned field. It's maintained by the town of Templeton, unless Phillipston is going to, contribute on a capital thing to that field. That's a town field. And so I'm asking, is that 10 grand out of school choice? Is that a gift to the town? And if it is, it needs to go a separate direction from my seat.
So I can speak to this because just now I might have my years wrong. I want to say it was 2 years ago, but I would have to defer, quite frankly, because it's been a while. I know that the rec department and the school, and I believe it was the cemetery committee. I'm a little foggy, but we met to see about the placing water, obviously to get water on the fields in terms of an irrigation. And I want to say that it was Scott Dill who I believe went before the committee, meaning the select board. I will tell you that I don't remember the year. This has been here a bit, and because of COVID and some other things, it's they haven't been able to put the water system in yet. I think it is up for this year, meaning this spring. But I defer to someone who obviously has a better memory than I.
Yeah, Scott Dill is with us this evening. So Scott, if you want to chime in at all, if you think you can add to that discussion, we're basically just trying to figure out, even the question, the purpose of the 10,000.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Like Chris said, it was probably 2 or 3 years ago that we had all had discussions, Parks and Cemetery, Recreation, in the school, to try to figure out how to get water on that town-owned property because of the dire need for it up there. So, they said they could contribute $10,000 towards an irrigation solution up there. So, funding wise, I don't know on their side of the house how it's generated or where it comes from, but that was talked about, and I don't know how it is to be presented to the town through a gift or so forth. So I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very familiar with what Jeff is referring to. If we could take a note, Adam, to be able to discuss that with Narragansett and
I could just jump in. I think Jeff is correct. I mean,
Yeah.
Because they are Narragansett Regional, the select board would have to accept the donation.
Yep.
So it's more of a technical thing that needs to be
Yep.
addressed.
if you could take that, if you could take a note with Dr. Kazavan, just to kind of to explain that change in our policy. It was within the last year. We've had gifts before, but we've added some additional considerations to gifts. But that is a good point. Thank you, Jeff. Did you have anything else on that, Jeff, before we move on?
No, just Narragansett taught me how to read and comprehend what I read.
You're welcome.
Fantastic. All right, Chris, I've moved forward to slide 11.
So of all the concerns, the things that keep me up at night, obviously, and there's quite a few, but this is the area in which I'm, that worries me the most. So we've all heard and we know what, remote and COVID has done to a lot of people, both adults and student, but we have seen some increases that we haven't seen in a bit. And when we start talking about gaps in learning, and again, that's going to be a focus this summer and probably beyond, according to the Biden administration. So we've seen certainly an increase. We've seen probably the largest increase to transportation that I've seen in quite some time. And when you look at that out district placement, a 30% increase, to our budget. Now that's overall. That is something that should just really stop us in our tracks. When we start looking at these, again, these services are important. They are generally services that we cannot provide. But what we do like to pride ourselves on is that we, through early intervention and the programs that we're putting in place at the elementary, that we're able to keep our kids in town. We want to keep them here, not just to save money, ladies and gentlemen. There are students, they're from Templeton and they're from Phillipston. We currently, and it happens. People move into the district, for example, and it happened just last year, or a little bit more than that, where someone came in with quite a bit of, some needs, and their placement's costing $250,000. That's one person. But the transportation is very obviously is concerning as well. And so when you look at something like your special education costs go up, obviously 6.6 over last year, and when special education itself makes up almost a quarter of the general fund budget, these are the things that really need focus and attention. So if you remember back on the slide, I gave the end of the story, I gave it away, right? But we are always looking to increase our programming for special education kiddos. We're always looking to be able to better assess them. We're looking, we want them here with us. And look, there are some kiddos that just can't, and that's okay. That's just what they need. But this is where I want to really drive folks' attention, because it's going to require, some thought, but also some programming as we move forward. So without any,
Bob's got a question.
Yeah, I just want to try and help Chris sleep here. It says increase in out of district placement tuitions going from 873,355 to 985,985 is a 30% increase. Is that what that's supposed to be saying, Chris?
Oops, sorry. Yeah, for this year, right?
Yeah, that's like 13%.
13? I did my math. Oops, sorry. I keep muting myself. Then if I made a mistake, then I apologize. Let me look at that. I'm not going to do the math.
I just wanted to try and help you sleep.
Thank you. But thank you. And I guess that does make sense as I'm looking at it real quick. But I will say that when we see a jump like this, though, and I'm not trying to, 13 or 30, you're absolutely right. That's a huge number. Those are not increases that this district generally, if you look over time, have seen. Now, a lot of that has to do with, there isn't a lot of regulation on this, folks. I'm going to tell you. They apply for a rate increase. The state says, in most cases, yes. I have not seen many no's, quite frankly. So that is concerning. But thank you, Bob, for picking that up. But it's a huge part of our budget. And when we start looking into the effects of COVID, we become even more concerned, obviously. But thank you, Bob. So
I think it's about 12.
Next slide.
I can ask a quick question.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Spring.
Yeah, this would go back to the last slide, if you could.
Yeah.
Now, the special education, that's a pretty good size chunk of the general fund budget. Isn't there some relief out there as far as grants or federal to help reduce the actual amount that the town has to come up with to help better level that out?
Yes, and we do have relief, mostly through circuit breaker and 270 grants, et cetera. And let me tell you, if I get my math right here, but if we did not apply those costs right to the 270 grant specifically, or through circuit breaker, it would be much, much higher. Quite frankly. So no, we use every dime when it comes to any opportunity, let's put it that way, to offset cost.
Yeah, because that takes a big chunk of the budget, and I'm just looking at that. If we could somehow reduce that, it would help the overall budget also.
And there's also laws from, that again, I don't want to go too deep into this, but it's obviously federally mandated, right? And an IEP is basically a contracted document that is enforced by the IDEA. And so what we try to do, we try to get kiddos who might have some gaps or otherwise some issues. We try to get them early, right? Early intervention, pre-K, K. And work with the families to make sure that they stay part of our community. They'll always be part of our community, but we want them in our buildings.
So this is one of those mandates that is not probably fully funded that we're strapped with.
So when Tammy was going through a great presentation and she talked about the formula, right? And she said, look at the spend increase. And she was going through all of that. I looked at Anne Marie and I smiled, because this is one of the biggest areas of contention with us, is that they never even updated that part along, for years. And so of course these costs are skyrocketing, but the formula wasn't really addressing anything close to that. And that of course was to be fixed through to the SOA. But anyway, I just want to make sure that I don't want to single out children with special, it's a service, and that's why they have team decisions and those things. It's important, but we want to provide as many services as we can here for a lot of good reasons.
All right, thank you.
So the fixed costs, and I'm sure, that we all share this, right? So Worcester Regional Retirement for us went up 28%. Employee health insurance rates went up 5%. General property insurance, 17.5. So obviously, when you look back and forth, the fixed costs have increased by 3% over last year, and the fixed costs make up 20.5 of the entire general fund. So what can we do here? And we have Anne Marie talking to brokers and different insurances, et cetera, to see if, what can we do? And but these costs were, again, the Worcester Regional Retirement increase was quite high, a lot higher than we thought it was going to be.
28%. Wow.
Chris, if I might,
Sorry.
excuse me, I didn't put my hand up.
No, it's all right. Go ahead, Bob.
If on the general property insurance, that's 17.5%, is that in relation to the new school TES?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
So being it's a one time, in other words, it went up because we generally didn't have it. We didn't have it before. So that's,
Yes. Thank you.
You bet. So the operating budget, and actually this came as I don't remember from the committee who made the recommendation a couple of years ago, but when we start looking at the operating budget, we want to make sure that we're upfront and we say, look, revolving accounts, circuit breakers, school choice grants, those are all, they are in fact, funding services, et cetera. But in the reverse, obviously they do in fact work to help lower it. So when you start looking at the grand scheme of things and you say, look, it takes 23,165,782 to run the district. And we've applied all the appropriate expenditures to the grants that the government, et cetera, will allow you to do. And so when you look at that and you subtract out what, again, then adding Chapter 70 and local aid, as I think I've discussed now 2 or 3 times I've presented this budget, you come up with a shortfall of 188,345. Now, when I say this, I don't say it like, well, we had it in our back pocket anyway, but generally this would be the time we'd be like, well, we've got to find these cuts. Well, I have to say to you that to live to fight another day is a great example of, this number is a great example of that. Right now, just given everything I've talked about, right, prior, is that where to find $188,000 in terms of if it's going to be cuts, right? We've already kind of went that route. So it starts to take on, where do you go to, I think Bob, probably everybody's point, right? Prior is like, what do you do next year? What do you do the year after? And I think that is the type of thing that we need to and have been trying to work on as quickly as, and judicially as possible, but it's hard to know what's in store when it certainly comes to the, the reasons why they're giving us these one-time funds. So again, we put this slide here obviously purposely because we want to make sure that we're, again, putting out there for everyone to see. And Bob, if I may, you're absolutely right. The number should say 373, 355 versus 485, 985 for a 30% increase. The increase was right, but my number, the number is a typo. So, but thank you for that. And I will correct the slide.
Thank you, Chris. If I might segue right into a question here.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, this is a good slide to illustrate a concern of mine. So we have the budget here of $20,057,186. Of that budget, there's, if I'm not mistaken, is about 19,400,000 and change that's actual revenue. There's 480,000 that you're using as E&D as one-time funds, topped with 139,403 in ESSR 2, and then topped with this 188,345. So and you correct me if I'm wrong here, Chris, but just so that people are straight, the one-time use of funds in this budget is actually $807,000. Even though the ESSER 2 funds amount to only 139,403 of that. So that is my big concern. Is the 139 is a part of it because that's 2% of next year's budget already, but this $807,000 use of one-time funds scares the bejesus out of me. I just wanted to make that clear to myself, and if I'm wrong, please correct me. I'm done.
Not wrong. Actually, it's actually more than that when you add Phillipston's, right? So I just want to make sure.
Yes,
Again, just to be.
I was just adding Templeton's.
No, I know that, but I just want it for the record. So if someone saw the number later on and said, well, you said, not this, I'm just saying that I just want to make sure that I put that amount in there as well. And it's noted later on, but 858, 177. But to your point, yes. I mean, I think that's the, we have used one-time funds. And again, I can't go for years and years and years. I can go back to all these budgets, it's an essential way that many schools, and you heard one of them today talk about it. We have to use these funds in order to offset cost to our member districts. I mean, if the history of school finance was, school choice was literally, when they wrote about it, it was the greatest thing in the world, right? Because what you could do is these one-time projects that was going to help save. That's really what folks were hoping that it would do. But what happened is the funding formulas and everything else that happened, it became almost a staple, or it became a stake, through your heart if you're upside down. So I make certainly no excuses about it. It's the only way to then offset cost, that otherwise, would have to be passed on.
I absolutely understand, Chris. I just wanted to make it clear because it's not on this graph here that, there's a lot more money in here that's not going to be there next year.
Oh, certainly the ESSER, right? Yes, there's no doubt, no doubt. But again, what I'm hopeful is that, in talking to Mike's point about, the plan moving forward and having these conversations and really working as hard as we possibly can to make sure that there isn't a cliff. I think that's going to be the key to, to everyone's success, especially here, without a doubt.
Great.
So the next slide, please. So we talked about excess and deficient quite a bit. What we did is we tried to show a little bit different, a little bit different of a slide showing when it actually is used. Certainly folks at the town level know, I know that many of you know, if not all of you know, that it's just like your free cash. The only real difference is that E&D cannot exceed a 5%. The general fund, or you can lose that in Chapter 70 forever, basically. But again, we wanted to show this and to show that the monies that have been used and are being used, and especially over the last couple of years, in terms of using whatever the monies were, whatever they were, for E&D, they've been placed to offset cost to the budget. So the next slide. So obviously, this should come as no surprise in terms of revenue. It was decreased, right? Transportation. We're not, we're bound. Obviously, we didn't do as much transportation this year, or transporting, right? A lot of the numbers that we normally count on were down. Just looking at back in FY21. I believe that, somewhere in the area of, I don't know, about 1.4 maybe was proposed, I think. And so we saw, obviously, and it was a 2.55, increase basically last year. I'm talking about FY21 now. But now you're looking at, really the results of COVID, et cetera. And when you see a 1.66, well, what you're trying to do is not rise above 1.6, or you're trying to match your revenue. And that is exactly why, at least as I'm told, why ESSER 1 and 2s have come out in order to offset some of these. But that, again, we've talked quite a bit about that. So the next slide. So again, this is we just really truncated the income sheet to look at where the ESSER grants, where they sit and how they affect, the town budgets. Pardon me. And that's where I get the 100 and the total amount that we spoke about earlier. And again, not a lot to say here unless there's a question or two. This is pretty standard for us, and we've seen this a lot. I wanted to go through the next slide. I got an interesting question, and I don't honestly remember who, and it's terrible, but so what have you done for us, Castman? And what have you trying to do? And so if you look through it, the assessment, I'll be the first one to say that, it's not going down as much as I would like, or maybe as you would like, right? But what I want to also point out too is that when you do look at the overall, when I look at the general fund budget, we've worked very hard to make sure that we're keeping these increases, to what we need. So in terms of, I can't even think of anything frivolous, quite frankly, folks. But the fact is that these numbers they're not skyrocketing up. We're trying to bring them down, and we're trying to level, right? So, but I want to say this because I have to, is that what I see, and although folks were cognizant, they were there, because I was there all 4 meetings and last year as well, that these class sizes, especially the elementary, when I say I fear, I do worry for the educational process, but I feel that there are going to be folks who go, well, wait a minute, you never told us about this. And I'm going to be the first one to say, no, this is something that was decided by, at least at that point in time. So I do say that just as almost as if, look, here we are. This is how we've got to this, to these, to making sure that we're keeping these budget increases, without breaking the bank, quote unquote. And I realize that that's relative, but we are making progress in that area. I think there's going to be a time when we may be forced, but again, that's forecasting. I can't see into a crystal ball. I don't know. I'm told there are houses everywhere being built everywhere, right? All these kids are coming to school. Well, look, I don't know that until they actually get into school. So I'm not going to, engage in that type of conversation. I'll know when I know, but they are climbing, and so we'll see soon. But I wanted to throw, this is a new slide. I wanted to put that in there as well. So Care 2 funding, we want to make sure that you see where we spent it, right? So we were awarded $551,000, the minimum local contribution subsidy to both towns. The balance is $361. We talked about the shortfall of $188,000. I'm rounding, folks. Obviously, we have put away $15,000 for summer school because that's part of what our obligation is, obviously. These, a big part of the conversation is elementary and how many teachers do we have there, et cetera, above and beyond but we had to add 3 temporary positions again because of the 3-foot rule. And not only beyond that, but for primarily, and of course, PPE was a big expense, certainly in the beginning. This is the CARES 2, pardon me. I think I might have said ESSER. I meant to say CARES 2, my fault, sorry. So moving on from that, there was a question about one-time spending. Like, what are you buying with this one-time monies? And so some of this stuff is really straight, cleaning supplies, PPE, plexiglass. I don't know who owns stock in plexi, but keep buying. Because I don't see it going down anytime soon. Storage containers. We had to find places to actually put things because we had to empty classrooms in order to put desks in or tape to make sure that we can put as many kids in the classrooms that we could safely, of course. Special education tuitions. Well, folks, anything that was related, we put money towards, and that was certainly one of those areas. Teachers, we talked about that. High needs monitors. We have to have people who can watch large groups of kids because maybe teachers are out sick because of COVID, et cetera. So those are what monitors are. Nursing has been a huge piece of what we have to do every single day. Technology, of course, as I call it, we went 1-to-1 within 24 hours and really had to beef up our servers and our internet hotspots, et cetera. Pardon me, retirement costs for the added teachers, that has to come out. Ingenuity, which is one-time learning platform. So if during this process and beyond, if you have someone who needs to take a certain class that we can't fill because for whatever reason it's Mandarin Chinese, and I'm not lying or I'm not being facetious, that would be a way that we could offer it without actually hiring a teacher, etc. So it's a great use of money during these times. So all told, you're looking at $430,000. So moving on to that. So the bottom line is we try to add in every presentation. So the ESSER funds, we already know how that is available for each town for this year only. And we also put, as you folks obviously know at this point, what the subsidy would be, or the MLC with the subsidy. So I don't know if there's too many questions with that. Next slide. And I had to throw a plug in that we're back April 5th. There's going to be, the school committee is going to, entertain some, hopefully I don't know if we're entertaining, but certainly we're going to roll out the plan about how we're going to get to where we need to be. There's a lot of misinformation out there. And if I may, I don't think the commissioner has done us any favors, if I may, but I'll speak to that in my forum. The plans to get back to students in our building. Let me say this. Please check me on this, right? There weren't many districts around, in a pretty good circle, that decided to go back at 3 feet K through 12. We did that because so many of our parents said, we want our kids in. That is a big deal. And I think you're going to see that play out more now when you see districts who are at 6 foot try to move now into 3 foot, and they're getting a lot of resistance, meaning that there were times when we looked at the square footage of a classroom, moved out everything possible, and we could fit 8 students in there in any particular grade. That was just when I'll say this, it just wasn't acceptable. We had parents who needed to have their kids in school. I believe the kids need to be in school. We made this building safer by working on our HVAC and doing all the things that we've been trying to do. We want these kids in. 3 foot was the way to go, although we took a lot of criticism about going remote the most. Yep, we did. That's because we had 5 kids within one. If one child was positive, 5 kids had to go. And so that made us quarantine more. But guess what? We put more kids in school, right? Because that's where they belong. Yeah. And I want to make sure I say that, because that is literally, applause to our teachers and our staff, our custodians, our administrators, everybody. It was not easy, but we're back. And it's going to look a lot the same because we were already maxed out in most of our classrooms. The inconsistent guidelines, those are some of our bigger issues. They keep changing. Never mind the goalposts, folks. They're changing the ball. They're changing everything. CDC is now about to rule on changing the 3 foot rule. For God's sakes, just tell me what my rules are, right? Yeah. So Dr. the fact is, yeah. So
I just wanted to pause here real quick. You had either you had a couple of questions or comments, or you had some applause and thumbs up. So I just wanted to pause a little for a second just to make sure that there wasn't a question. Other than that, you had a lot of thumbs up and clapping.
I had a question, Mr. Okay. Chairman.
Yep, that's what I thought. Go ahead, Will.
Has there been any talk by you or the school board, because this seems to be something new? Well, it's new now, but it actually happened the last time we had a pandemic when we had the Spanish flu, of having outdoor classes. That seems to be something that's happening. I believe it's in Oregon, and the other night they had a sessions where they had a number of classes in Maine that were doing outdoors classes, and they think it's a very positive way for kids to school to take and end up doing some learning. Has there been any discussion and that would help with the fact that you have to take and end up putting the kids in the school building itself? Has there been any talk about that, Dr. Kazavan?
There has, and quite frankly, it really boils down to staffing. So if I can keep them in the buildings, that's when I say this, when I say they're safer, they are, because we have everything that we have in there. We have the air filtration system. Yes, there's nothing better than outside, folks, right? but our technology is inside. We again, all of our teachers will be teaching to 2 separate groups of people, the kids in front of them, and many of them, right, and the kids who are still remote. So there is a connectivity issue, but we are looking into. We're not done, right, by any stretch. So to your point, well, yes, we are looking into tents. I don't know how much outside of it, outside instruction, we'll have to do or can do, but we are going to look at that to see, if we can expand. But at the elementary level, and I don't need to tell anybody here, right? There's not a lot of room for a tent, and right now that's where my main, our main concern is in terms of staffing. But yes, we are definitely looking into that.
Thanks, Dr. C. And that looks like it's your last slide, Dr. Casavant.
I'm sure everyone is happy to hear that. So, but that's what I have. And, but I have to say that, Adam and I have definitely, had some tough talks, and we've had to kind of come together about some of these things. And I appreciate his time as well. And, but of course, I'm here to answer any questions.
And if I could also add to Chris, we spent a significant amount of time. We were fortunate to, yes, there is use of one-time funds, but we both have balanced budgets, and we just spent countless hours. I mean, we met Zoom, we chatted on the phone. We'll continue that work, and 23, I think we'll be talking a lot more.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and matter of fact, Adam, I think a lot of the stuff that we've already been working on, again, I when we started talking ESSER and that was on the table, we definitely needed to be able to have something constructive to show what is our plan. It may be a draft plan. It may be, it requires a lot of extra information, but the earlier and the more information sharing that we have, I think the better situation that we'll be with, or at least aligned with the school district. But I agree with you, Adam. Okay, any other questions? I'm looking at 9 o'clock. Any other questions for the school district before we move on to one of the last items for this evening?
And I just also wanted to say to your point, I mean, the 3 of us, we've been working on that plan, and we've come up with some pretty good results so far.
Yeah. And when it's ready to go live, I mean, it's draft, like I said, I for the folks that we have in the room, it's working collaboratively, not within a vacuum. So it won't be a mysterious plan or otherwise. It will definitely be issued as a draft, so we can all take a look at it for some of the ideas that we have currently.
Thank you.
Dr. C, Margaret, thank you very much for joining this evening. I think you said you had Sue with you, so thank you to Sue too.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you. Good night.
All right. Good evening. Have a great evening. Okay, for the next item that we have this evening, it's on the agenda as budget follow-up, Q&A, and revisits. And we definitely needed that. Unfortunately, Mr. Dill could not attend at the point in the afternoon when we went over the rec budget and the capital items. So I know we have a running list of action items. I was working with Adam today on making sure. I think we need to send those out probably tonight, Adam, just for, I had added in a status column to make sure that we knew whether any work had been done on them, whether they were complete or otherwise. But tonight I want to focus on the stuff that we can work out with Mr. Dill. The items that we had were the capital items and then the Gilman Waite Wi-Fi. So in any particular order, Scott, if you wanted, I know that you asked to do some screen sharing, but if you'd like to, the floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, we do have a guest with us tonight, Tanner Cole from Caspi Grounds. If we could cover the irrigation first, Scott.
Absolutely.
So if we let him go, that would be great.
Okay.
That's fine. Yep.
Okay, Mr. Cole, you're here to address concerns that that our joint meeting had the other day on, I think Bev characterized it as a lack of a plan, but then specifically there were some questions about irrigation, recharge rates and otherwise. So welcome. Thanks for being with us tonight. Floor is yours.
Okay, good evening. Thank you to everyone. I just wanted to briefly go over what the plan was for the irrigation system and the sports turf maintenance and answer any questions you have. I've been working with Bob at the DPW for a little over a year now, assessing the fields, doing some soil testing. And I've reviewed not only the work that we've done over the past year, but also the proposed irrigation system and all the data that we've got on the existing well at the facility. And I guess the primary concern was the well's ability to service the irrigation system. And so currently the well's rated at 40 gallons per minute. That's the yield of the well, meaning if you pump exactly 40 gallons a minute, the water level in the well doesn't drop. You start pumping more than that, the water level in the well would obviously drop down. So the irrigation system that's proposed will draw 24 gallons a minute. So it's well within the yield of the well, and will certainly be a huge benefit to the turf. You know, I've been working with Bob, as I said, for about a year now on the fields. We did some soil testing. We've also started to do some seeding and fertilizer work. And our goal is not to put the field on a completely automated watering system. It's really to supplement what Mother Nature provides. I try to be extremely conservative with water. I consider it our most valuable resource. And, you know, in New England, we're blessed with the fact that we get more annual rainfall than we really need. And so we can use irrigation very strategically, primarily in the months of July and August, where on these fields in particular, we try to do our grub control and any surface insect control when the fields aren't really seeing a lot of use. And those products really benefit from being irrigated properly. So that's where these systems really come into play. It's not really meant that, you know, it provides all the water. It's meant more to supplement what Mother Nature is providing. So I don't know if anybody has any specific questions or if that was a good enough summary of where we're at with things.
Hey, Tanner, if I may, I also like to add that with the soil testing, we did check a couple areas. The soccer field, if I'm correct, Scott, that had 6 inches of loam on top than sand, which is more than enough. And the other areas in the field had 4 to 5 inches, some areas 6, digging down 16 inches with subsoil with no sand. If you want to touch on the irrigation part of it and what it would do, saturating that topsoil and allowing it to not flood and drain with the sand and gravel.
Yeah, I can certainly elaborate on that. One of the common misconceptions is that if you have a playing surface or even a home lawn where you have 6 inches of topsoil and then sand, people commonly think that, oh, the water just goes right through because the sand underneath is so porous. And in reality, what happens if you get a rain event or if you irrigate, the topsoil won't let the water leak through until it's at field capacity. Field capacity is the soil's ability to hold and retain water. And it's really driven by the organic matter level in the soil. So the fields at Gilman Waite have about 5% organic matter, which is pretty much ideal for sports turf. You know, in a home lawn, you might want 6 or 8%, but on sports turf, you tend to stay in the 4 to 6% range, primarily because the more water you retain, the muddier the field can get when you have a lot of rainfall in the spring or fall. And so when we irrigate, or if you have a natural rain event, that topsoil, when it reaches field capacity and it's fully saturated and the soil can't hold any more water, then it will leach through to the sand below. And that's actually a benefit because it keeps the field from getting muddy and having big puddles. And so some of the best fields I've worked on over my 25 years in the turf industry have had gravel or sand bases under them. And it allows you to keep a good, healthy stand of grass, but also have a field that remains playable. In the areas where you have 6 inches of loam and then a subsoil, it really depends on the character of that subsoil. I would imagine that it's not a silty, clayey material. I would imagine it's more of a sand-based or a gravel-based material. And so it should perform pretty much the same as the loam that's sitting right on top of the sand. But I hope that clears up any sort of concerns people may have had about having a field that's has sand underneath. It's in a lot of ways, it's a benefit more than a liability.
Mr. Chairman, if I could ask a question. It sounds, you're saying, Mr. Tanner, that you're doing a supplement during the months of July and August as far as the irrigation?
Yeah, that's my personal philosophy behind the irrigation. You know, a lot of people are used to, oh, we started up in the spring after the winters pass and we go through the system and make sure it works and then we just turn it on. I prefer not to do that. I prefer to let the system run only when we need it to run. And a lot of that would follow what we've got going on in terms of your fertilizing and insect control and so on. You know, you gotta kind of walk a little bit of a line because you don't want the field to dry out completely and get stressed and go dormant. But I've always looked at irrigation as being supplemental to Mother Nature. And there are things you can do depending on how fancy you want to get. You can install sensors on the irrigation controllers that monitor evaporative transpiration, which evaporative transpiration is the measurement of how much water evaporates from the plant and the soil. They actually have sensors that tie into most of the controllers now that monitor that and then adjust the watering automatically. You know, it's primarily something you do when you're paying for the water. On well systems, we tend to use a rule of thumb, so to speak, where the water cost isn't as high. But if water conservation is something you're concerned about, those are all options that we can use.
Well, the reason I ask that is that typically the last couple of years, the months of July and August, we've been in drought conditions where, yes, later on in the year, it's made up, especially in last year, it was made up as far as that goes. But also, that's in order to end up irrigating it at that particular time of the year. If we're in a drought condition, that's a substantial amount of water. I just did some quick figures myself, and I looked at the fact that to get the actual 1 inch of water per week to a depth of 6 or 8 inches requires on a 10,000 square feet, 6,230 230 gallons, which would be 162,924 gallons for the 6 acres. And then on top of that, we need to take and end up looking at the maintenance costs. I went out and did some research with my brother-in-law, who is for many years was a superintendent of multiple golf courses and had irrigation on those golf courses, not only on the greens, but on the fairways. In fact, the gentleman is a great uncle to Scott, and I haven't talked to the cousins, his second cousins, who also work for the Parks Department and also actually has a irrigation company that's out there. So that's my next place I'm going to be talking. Those are some current concerns that he came up with the fact that you also need a check valve so that you don't get the backflush back into the well per se also. And then at the end of the year, you need to take and end up flushing this. Who's going to do this? This is probably a thing that the recreation committee is not going to do. Is going to have to fall on the cemeteries and grounds committee, and that's an area where Bob would end up talking to. Plus the fact that he did mention that if you do have an irrigation system, it's going to require quite a bit of level of support during those particular times when you're using it. So those are some concerns I have about the overall process of doing this. I mean, it's a good thought to take and end up wanting to take and have nice green grass, but during this, the fact that we have these drought conditions here in the last couple of years, it just doesn't seem that this particular irrigation system is going to end up handling the need for the amount of water that it needs to take and end up actually keeping the grass from going dormant.
Well, if I may, Mr. Chair, I can shed a little bit of light on the quantities and how all of this would work.
I don't know if this is the right forum for a technical discussion to that level, especially after it's been proposed and approved by CPC. So I don't know about the depth of the question, but especially when we have two more questions stacked up on this question, could actually hang on to that to see how the conversation develops, Mr. Cole.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, Mr. May, you had your hand up first.
Yes, I had a question for Tanner. I was wondering if he could tell me, since it seems as though Bob had said that roughly 6 inches of Gilman weight is covered with loam on top of gravel or sand, whatever he was referring to. Could you tell me how much water 6 inches of loam retains over 6 acres?
I would have to break out a spreadsheet because that's a function of the percent of organic matter.
Okay.
And I could get you that number. One of the things that you need to keep in mind with all of this is it's highly variable. And so you can say it requires 27,000 gallons to put an inch of water down on a field, and that's accurate. But you also have to take into a consideration some years we don't get any thunderstorms midsummer. Other years it seems like you can set your clock by them every afternoon they roll in. So each year is going to be a little bit different, but I'd like to avoid just doing the simple math and saying, oh, well, we've got 6 acres, 6 times 27,000 gallons. We're going to have to pump 160,000 gallons.
Mr. Tanner, if I might, I'll just get to my point then. I'm not really going with that. I'm saying, all right, let's say we have 166,000 gallons we need to put on the field. The well at 40 gallons max, how long is it going to take to water the field?
No, certainly.
70 hours, sir.
Yep. No, certainly that's part of it, but that's not the only part of the equation. So for example, if we go out there, we put our grub control down and we want to put 1 inch of irrigation down to water that product in, yeah, you're going to have to run the system quite a bit that week, but that doesn't mean that there's no value in it. In my mind, you know, you've got a well that'll produce 40 gallons a minute. You've got an irrigation system that's using 25, and that's 25 gallons a minute that you can't put out there right now. You know, I think it's still a valuable proposition.
So this is better than nothing.
It certainly is better than nothing. And
that's what I think too.
If we did a real detailed analysis, we could determine how much water the field can hold in reserve and its field capacity, and then how much water you can put down, and you can go back through historical weather and, you know, really, draw all sorts of conclusions. But at the end of the day, it's certainly a step in the right direction. And just so everyone's clear, my company has nothing to do with the irrigation install. We're simply doing the fertilizer and seeding work. So I have no skin in this game. I'm just here to help connect the conversation and provide.
I appreciate your position, Mr. Tanner. I'm sorry for you being put in that position, because I personally think it's indefensible. You know, I don't see where, I mean, you're talking about putting down 24 gallons of water at a time in a 39 circuit unit. When you talk about 24 gallons, you're going to do that 34 times that 24 gallons. Otherwise, you're doing 1/39th of the field. I mean, you know, you can call that sufficient. You can call that a great irrigation.
That's gallons per minute. That's not a total volume. That's a rate of flow.
Right, and the well only goes 40, Mike. That's the issue. So you can only run 1 circuit.
I'm not. I don't think that squares with what he said.
Oh, could you correct me, sir?
Well, the system currently is designed to run 24 gallons a minute. Now you can change that. You know, you've got 4 heads per zone, so you could crank the nozzles up. All the new irrigation heads, you can re-nozzle them. So if you wanted to run right up to 40 gallons a minute, that's typically not how designers do it. They try to leave some reserve there so that the system isn't using all the water.
Mr. Tanner, excuse me, Mr. Cole. I think Mike thought that you could run more than 1 circuit at a time.
You know, when you say system, that's the entire system. Bob, what are you saying when you're saying circuit?
Circuit. The system is made up of 39 circuits of 4 sprinklers for each circuit. Each 4 sprinkler circuit pumps 24 gallons of water a minute. So they can't run 2 circuits at the same time.
Okay.
Or they're drawing too much water for the well's capacity. So they have to water it in 39 separate events, or however it's.
Okay. I got it, Mr. May. Can we let Bev ask her question?
All right, hang on. How much water were you proposing to put on a section?
Well, that's really a function of the time of year and how dry things are.
Yeah, but in the middle of the summer.
Yeah, typically you run systems like this for 20 to 30 minutes a zone. And you have 39 zones. So a lot of times what you would do is, if you just use round numbers and said you had 40 zones, you'd have 20 zones run one day and then 20 zones run next day.
How much water would you put down though when what were you planning to put down for a zone?
Well, as I said, you'd run 20 or 30 minutes a zone. So if you keep the system calibrated for 24 gallons a minute and you're running for 20 minutes, you're going to be at 480 gallons for that zone. And then you'd run 20 zones like that in one day. So that's going to get you at about 10,000 gallons. And then the next day you'd pump another 10,000 gallons on the remainder of the field.
Oh.
About a 16th of an inch.
Well, I hate to break it to you like this, but 1/16 of an inch is not going to do anything. Yep. If you have broadleaf grass, you may not even get the ground wet. My husband, we own greenhouses. Okay, we use a lot of water, and we also have a garden. And I would never depend on a thunderstorm to water anything. I've sold plants to people for years, and they think their irrigation system is going to water their plant in a pot or in the garden, and it just doesn't do it. You need more water than that. We have other issues to deal with. The fact that this thing has to be the system has to be taken care of. If we lay off our highway department and our grounds people, there's not going to be anyone to do it. And our financial outlook for the future is not sparkling. Let's put it that way. You know, I appreciate you coming though. You've done a good job. We played softball up there for years. My ex-husband used to play, and nobody ever had a groomed field, and they did fine. I just don't think this is the right time. And that well, I don't think it's got enough of a recharge area, and it's going to have to take care of bathrooms and their cook shack. So it's not just, what do you got, a 2-inch pipe coming out of that hydrant?
All right, Bev.
Anyway, yeah.
Thank you. I do have another question. Go ahead, Terry. Terry, you're on mute.
Sorry. I have two things, and I don't care who answers them. So we
Do you have
mentioned
comments or questions?
two questions. We mentioned supplemental for water conservation. Then there were some supplemental things we could do to, irrigate. I just was wondered if those were rolled over into the price that we have, or they would be extra now. If our quote would satisfy that, or if we'd have to order extra. I was wondering, and I'm just going to blurt out my questions and shut my mute off. So then I was wondering if we could store any of the rainwater for future use. You know how, on a small scale, you can get rain barrels. I don't know if there's any way you could have like a rain pond up there or something. And then my third question, and I think Scott would be able to answer this, is do you get revenue from the tournaments and stuff, and is that going to impact your budget? If those fields are dry, you mentioned that if the fields were dry, nobody wants to play on them, no other towns want to come in. So I just wanted to know how that impacts your budget if the fields aren't well irrigated and viable for tournaments and stuff.
All right, thanks, Terry. All right, so we've got, is the funding the 100,000, is the funding adequate for the current system as designed, or then storage options? Are there any storage options or retention of water? And then revenue impacts on activities on the field.
The first one was if we had to supplement, is the current the current price that we have, if we had to supplement for water conservation, is the current price adequate?
Mr. Chair, if I may, I think she was picking up on a comment that I had made. And when I was saying supplemental, I meant that the irrigation is to supplement what Mother Nature provides. It's not to confuse anybody and say that we have like accessories or something to put on the irrigation system. I did comment about that evaporative transpiration sensor. Those are pretty inexpensive. Again, I'm not the irrigation guy, so I can't really speak to costs on that end, but basically what my understanding is that the money that's been budgeted would install the whole thing.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Cole. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, there has been no official quotes, as that is not a procurement ways, because the monies have not been approved up there. So these are just estimates that are out there. So the funding that it was estimated would cover the system and any additional pieces it would need. Storage, there's no room for a retention pond. Bob, you can piggyback on that property. It's surrounded by neighborhoods, and the park is maxed out as 30 acres. So we cannot cross those boundary lines with a retention pond or anything. And revenue, we do have a Gilman Waite Parks and use permit that the town is working on also for the commons, that ours was put together and legal had approved it. So we do have a legal binding contract with organizations that use the property, that they do pay a field to use. They pay a fee to use those fields and so forth.
And would that be impacted if Terry, if I'm getting it right, would that be impacted if you didn't have an irrigation system where you would have grounds that were inadequate?
If it was a soccer tournament, I would have to say yes, but we do not currently hold any soccer tournaments at that facility, just town youth sports and some high school sports. The main tournaments are softball, and they rely on the infields, and we do wet them with a hose if we need from the well to get the dust down a little bit, but it's very minimal and it doesn't impact the game.
Terry, is that good?
Does that money go to your budget? Yeah, it is good, but it's part of your budget.
It's not a budget line item. It's not stated in the budget. It goes into the donation revolving account. Actually, into the revolving account, not donations. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Great. Mr. May.
Yeah, hi. I just really think we should just end this whole thing, because since its beginning, it's been presented, let's say inappropriately. The CPC meeting on September 10th, it wasn't listed appropriately on the agenda. There was no notice to the public. Nothing was going on. It was mentioned on July 19th when Scott brought through the presentation of CPC as a talking point. At the time, he didn't have anything on the concession stand. And then it was again spoke at of February 11th. But at no time was this thing ever brought forward as it's supposed to. I don't know, maybe Scott has filled out the CPC regulations, CPC forms, but this was brought to CPC last year as a rush to get it to fall town meeting in violation of the bylaws. You know, I'm just saying, enough is enough. How far are we going to go from ground zero before we call it quits?
So, Bob, what I don't want to argue that in our meeting this evening, because the meeting was. It's
just going long, and I'm just getting tired of it. That's all, Mike.
I understand, but from those three line items, there were questions. We basically, and I actually do like Will's. The way that he characterizes it, we had a hold on those three line items because they had additional questions that we weren't able to get to. There have been a lot of discussion, a lot of answers this evening on it. And we still have two other items. I know that the select board has a policy that we would have to take a vote to meet past 10 o'clock. But I don't want to talk about how it got there. Really the merits of it being in the capital plan as presented within the budget. So for the 100,000 line item irrigation at Gilman Waite, ultimately the voters, you know, we can certainly discuss those other items on town meeting floor. As far as the irrigation and otherwise, I've heard answers or otherwise, and to basically pull the hold off the irrigation to let it proceed so that it goes to town meeting. Well, actually, it'll go to pre-town meeting. You guys will have another swipe at it. And then the town will be able to make up their mind whether they want to fund that or not. Bev, go ahead.
Just point of information, the warrant article presented is the 230, and we can't split it up. It has to be that's what CPC signed off on. Just
okay.
CPC was only requested 200,000. It was a 230,000 request. 30,000 was being presented from rec, school, and Pajari, according to Scott on July 9th.
That's incorrect, Mr. May. It's 230,000. That was the public vote. That was the.
It was 200. It was 200 on September 10th. In the paper presentation you brought, the CPC showed 230 was the total amount. 200 was the CPC request, and 30 was what you were bringing. It's at 5 minutes and 50 seconds in on September 10th. Anybody want to go look at it? Go right ahead. It's right there.
You don't have to be rude, Mr. May. You can circle
I am
back.
tired, Scott, of this bull.
Yeah. So I would recommend that at least from the first part of the discussion, I'd like to hear the rest, that we can keep the hold on it if there are questions still on the amounts and otherwise. It should not go forward if the amounts are in question or otherwise, especially with this joint, with the joint advisory and select board. If there's still discussions on it, let's move on from irrigation. And Bev, could I, all right, I have a couple.
You're not gonna like it, but I'm telling you anyway. He didn't follow the procedure he was supposed to.
But Bev, I've already told you that I don't want to debate that.
It should
I don't
not.
want to debate that in this meeting. If there are still questions.
Not go to town meeting floor until it's straightened out.
I just said that. I just said that, Bev.
Good.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to
Will,
take
can
it
you
up, recommended to taking it up, just continuing the hold till so a few more things get resolved.
Yeah, you did hear me say that though, Will, right?
Yes, I did. I concur with you with what you're saying.
All right, Jeff, you had a point.
Mr. Chairman, I was just going to recommend, my concerns are with the procedure, who does what, a lot of things, cemetery commission, our bylaws, et cetera, et cetera. I not so much the water and use and all of that. My stuff is more technical, and I would suggest that, and I'm going to request that this be moved forward for further discussion by the Board of Selectmen at our next meeting. There is one thing that the town voted a bylaw to have cemetery commissioners, but accept the Mass General Law to have cemetery commissioners. I cannot find it in the bylaws, the laws that we have accepted, that we ever had park commissioners, and lacking park commissioners, it falls on the Board of Selectmen or the Road Commission. So I would like to move this item to a selectmen's meeting for a lot of discussion on technical stuff before, we're going to be the ones ultimately voting whether this article appears on the town warrant anyways. So that's just selectmen's authority. So I would move that the Board of Selectmen, we put this on our meeting agenda next for further discussion. I have a lot of questions, not about the irrigation, the water rates, the well, and nothing that. It does concern me, but I have more concerns about procedure and who should be doing what. As I already commented on, $10,000 coming from the school, that has not been dealt with correctly. And we have a history in this town. We're not the only town in the state that has these issues, but this is the only one that concerns me. We have a lot of procedural stuff that we do not follow. I'll be asking for a copy of the application for eligibility for this program.
Okay.
This item, the
Yeah.
application of funding that CPC says you're supposed to have before you go there. So I would
Understood.
just like this to be on the next selectmen's agenda.
All right, let me ask you this. We have fence and bathrooms. You know, Scott has basically been hanging with us for almost.
All of that. I want to discuss the legalities, the technicalities of, if you want to discuss, what the fencing is going to be and what it's going to cost. I mean, in 2019, CPC appropriated $50-something thousand to move a ball field and upgrade fencing. And now they want to replace all of the fencing. At least that's my take on the.
What I'd like to do for the remainder of the meeting, because we do have one brief thing Adam's got to cover before the adjournment. What I'd like to be able to do, and I know that there may be questions based on the other two items, I'd at least like to give Scott the opportunity to brief these, to basically say his piece. They may answer some of the questions along the way. What I would ask the joint meeting this evening, if you do have questions, take them down. I don't think that we have time for them this evening, but I would like to give Mr. Dill an opportunity to explain those two other things.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, we're all set with Mr. Cole, I'd like to have him, he can excuse himself.
I agree. Mr. Cole, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for all of your expertise in answering the questions this evening. Sorry I went so late.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to recommend that we move on to the other items, as well as I don't know if, as long as we have Mr. Dill here, is that they can talk about the swimming program that we put a hold on also.
Okay. All right. So, Terry, do you have anything before I address Mr. Dill?
Just one quick comment. This is where we get the name Templeton Tough. We can do this, guys.
All right.
We got March 24th, so.
Okay. Thank you. So, Mr. Dill, couple of things. If you want to go through your presentation on the other two, I'm not sure how much of a presentation that you had. And then we had a question about the Wi-Fi line item, and I don't know, Will, if it was a hold on the swimming. I think we wanted to add back the swimming.
Correct. And the internet service was the hold.
Yeah, we were talking about how the funding was. We want to put it back, but there was a question about how it was going to be funded.
Okay. Yeah, I think it would be like an Adams line item, disallow back to him. So Scott, let me give you the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Viewing the meeting from Saturday, there was a question on the line items for swim director and 2 assistants that was zeroed out. Currently, the state is still in a state of emergency for COVID-19 based on a decision last year by the Recreation Committee. We suspended the swim program due to the restrictions, and we follow MIAA guidelines for all youth sports and activities. And swimming does not currently have any guidelines to safely be done. So learn to swim, if you think about it, there's still social distancing in place. Per the governor, there's still a 6-foot rule, and masks must be worn if you cannot safely distance. The questions that were raised: how can we teach a child to learn how to swim safely if we have to maintain a 6-foot distance and a child has to wear a mask and the instructor has to wear a mask in the water? So that was our decision last year to cancel it. And around the same time, Terry had resigned quietly from, I think, at least 30 years of service with the swim program, which we greatly appreciate, but it's one of those things. I'm sorry I'm aging. I'm putting a date on you, Terry, but you did this town a tremendous service, so I applaud you for doing that. It's one of those things this year where Terry had stepped down. COVID-19 is still in full swing. Vaccines or not, we still cannot safely run that program at putting a child at risk when an instructor has to stay 6 feet from a child in the water. It makes no sense to put a child in the water and an instructor has to stay 6 feet. If that child goes under, 6 feet away is a long ways away.
Yeah, could I, Deb has a question. I'm sorry, Bev does.
My cousin Ruth told me last week that she goes swimming every day at the Y in Athol. I wonder how that can be. I'll have to ask her.
That's different from,
maybe it's because there's no lifeguards.
I'm not sure. My focus is on the town of Templeton and the liability aspect of it. So I'm not sure how that would work.
Because I mean, guidelines go to everybody, but I'll have to ask her. I'll let you know.
Yeah, because we follow the MIA guidelines for all youth and sports and so forth activity.
It's folks, I know we're running low on time, so I hope I'm not I'm being quick, but hopefully you're not taking it as being curt. I just want to be able to get to everyone's questions. Terry, go ahead.
For swimming, we went by Red Cross, so I'll volunteer to ask them if they have any guidelines. And you can, instructors could have a mask on and the kids couldn't. I mean, I don't want to get into the semantics of it. Maybe I'll just come to a rec board or talk to you on
yeah, that sounds like a
but we went by the Red Cross, and I'm sure Red Cross has been working on this. So that's just my suggestion. We were Red Cross certified. So,
Mr. Chairman, if I could, I think Mr. Dill answered the question in saying that it was the Recreation Committee that made the decision not to take and have the thing, and I think we should go with that for now.
I agree. Okay, Scott, next. Want to talk
So I
about
believe the next item of discussion was internet at Gilman Waite, if I'm correct?
Correct.
Okay. I know some questions were raised that why, when, and how, and what the purpose of that would be. Being a town-owned property and town-owned building, like most of our buildings in town, there is Wi-Fi in those buildings for internal use. That's what would be used at Gilman Waite. It would not be public use. So any war drive-bys or anything like that would not happen because the Wi-Fi would be secured. It would be for internal use. So, I hate to bring back up irrigation, but Wi-Fi could tie into that irrigation. Wi-Fi could tie into the scoreboard that we had donated up there. Wi-Fi could be for internal use of staff using that building. Recreation committee, anybody that uses it's a town-owned building, so it's open to the town officials to use. It's on town property. I think the Wi-Fi up there would be a benefit to that area. And like I said, it would not be for public access. And Tony brought up a great point. That park is surrounded by houses. Why wouldn't you shut off your Wi-Fi if you could just drain on the town's Wi-Fi? That's not our intention. And that's not the intention of any town building, I believe. The Wi-Fi is secure in every town building, I hope. And that would be the same case up there. I presented that number. I did the homework on my own. There is no legal contract. There's no legal binding. That was made very clear to Comcast Business that no business transactions would transpire until it passed through the layers of town government. So there was no signed contract. It was just a homework so I could present it intelligently to the board and the town and taxpayers. Because I'm a taxpayer first, I'm a volunteer second. So my interest is taxpayers.
Yeah, I think most of the questions, Scott, were about the actual the cost benefit ratio. Mr. May has a question.
Yeah, hi. Scott, first off, I want to apologize for being curt earlier. This has been a long haul and I've been, questioning these issues since last September, and having people say things like it's the first time they've heard it just upsets me. But regarding the internet, from what I'm hearing, even as the potential uses of the internet, there are none now, if I'm not mistaken. these are all future uses that you're talking about. Potentially, like if the concession stand was actually active, if the irrigation system was in, and such. I'm not hearing any present day use.
That's correct, Mr. May, and I do accept your apologies. I know, this issue has been going on, and I've been dealing with it, I think, as long as you've probably been dealing with it a lot longer than I have, but there is no current use up there. This is a future endeavor, for the progression of that park. Like I said, I'm the relief pitcher coming in the 9th inning here. I'm picking up this program from many, many years of volunteers, and I'm trying to finish the game. So the internet use up there, I think, is just bringing us into the next wave. And, the town buildings have it. Yeah, it's $130 a month for internet up there. But I think, with the benefits, and possibly some cameras up there. I know emergency management talked about cameras. I think, I'm a firm believer that alarm systems are fruitless when you can have a security camera system up there, or any town building that can be monitored by our police department, which I've had conversations with Chief Bennett. When they can dial in and give them our IP address, they can monitor that park 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, without sending an officer there. And vandalism has been on the increase up there. There's a lot of things happening. We're very close to Route 2, as you know. Those parking lots, I've driven up on people many times, and I've had to call the police department for activity up there that's just not supposed to be in a park. That's a place of sanctuary for kids to go and play and be safe. And, with the internet piggybacking with the cameras, and maybe none of this stuff will pass. Maybe nothing will get done up there. But you know what? At the end of the day, it's still a park. It's still got a playground, and people are going to visit it. So irrigation happens, that's great. Bathrooms happen, that's great. Fencing happens, that's great. It's a wish list. And you know what? We can fight and we can scream, but at the end of the day, I'm going to have grandkids someday. My kids are still young. I want to have a safe place for them to go. And, the internet, I think, will pay for itself just by having, if we have some cameras up there that the police department can monitor, that's a great thing. You know what? When an officer goes up there at night and they get there to a call, dispatch is already looking to say the suspect's running towards the basketball court. He's inside the building. He's got a weapon. That's a heads up for the police department. I think that's a win-win for everybody. Just my 2 cents.
Scott, just one question. The police department said that they would monitor the cameras. I mean, the reason I'm asking this is because alarm systems, they will not monitor at the police station. So, I mean, I'm finding this as a very unusual for the police department to take and end up monitoring cameras when they will not monitor security systems. I mean, I got a security system. I've asked a number of times to have it go into the police department. Even Gardner Police Department will not have it go in. You have to have a special dial-in process.
Right. These are based on IP addresses from the hard drives that they can dial into. So it's seamless for them. And it's a town building. So, private entity, private home, that's a whole different area. When it's a town municipality, the police department can monitor that building in that system.
Yep, Bev. Go ahead, Bev.
The thing is, with Wi-Fi, you're only going to be there maybe May, if you're lucky, if the weather's good, June, July, August, September, and October, depending on how cold it is. So you're talking not a long time to have Wi-Fi be useful, and I wouldn't hold my breath expecting the police to monitor your Wi-Fi. I don't think so.
Well, the police wouldn't monitor the Wi-Fi, and crime happens 365 days a year, day or night. It doesn't stop because of the weather. I think, the fee that we pay is minimal to public safety. And I think, we have a lot invested in that park with the playground and just kids alone. I mean, it makes sense for a liability to the town. Someone falls, someone gets hurt.
But if I could break in, is the 1560 that's on the line item, on the Rex 5200 account, is that for Comcast internet service or Comcast security?
Comcast internet service. It's
All
going to
right.
be,
I think that, I mean, I appreciate you said that what it can morph into with cameras and otherwise, but that's not what we should be debating right now, the future of what it could be. Right now, we're just arguing or asking questions about the internet service. So I'd like to keep it to that rather than how you're going to suggest a security system down the road. But I understand that it's the base for that.
Yep.
Mr. May, go ahead.
Mike, you preempted my comment here, but I just want to say that I agree with what you just said, and that I'd still put forward a motion to keep this on hold until we have a need and then present it again. Right now, we don't need the internet up there if we don't have any use for it. Once we have use for it, you can represent it.
Okay. Do I have some thumbs up I can see out there? To keep the hold on that Comcast internet line. Do I see any? Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm a thumbs up. Tim. All right. There is consensus on keeping a hold on that. Scott, for the last two items, the fencing and I'm sorry, the bathrooms, was there anything in particular? Were there any questions for Scott that that were burning? Right. And I understand that this is kind of all looped together. Scott, how do you want to handle fence and bathrooms? Questions or otherwise, did anyone have anything that they needed automatically from him?
One question.
Sure. Yes. Go ahead, Bob.
Bathrooms, public or private? Open to the public or open to Narragansett and sports teams?
they're open to the town of Templeton recreation events, school events, and town events.
So not public.
That is public. It's recreation, which is the youth of Templeton, school events, which is the youth of Templeton, and administration, and town events, which is the general public. To leave those bathrooms open 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, you have the risk of vandalism, damage to the septic system, damage to the building, and
Totally concur, Scott. Just saying CPC funding is all I'm looking at.
Mhm.
Public and
Yep, but-
private, restricted, difference, just all, just me.
right. But I don't think that we consider it private, where I just listed three areas that they will be open. So it's quite a bit they'll be open. They just won't be open 24 hours a day. And I don't think any bathroom in a park in the state of Massachusetts is open 24 hours a day.
I think Scott basically said it's only open during activities to the players as well as the general public, and it's closed out after that event is done. Am I correct?
That's what I heard.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, folks, let's try and capture. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Did you want to touch on the fencing? Did anybody have any questions? I know it was brought up that the CPC expended $58,000 to move the baseball field and fencing, but that was the fencing around the baseball field.
Yeah, so
Perhaps.
would that fencing have to be, is that in line or planned to be replaced?
That
Or
was
could
the-
that be reused?
The baseball
was the-
field, the
That
baseball
was the
field is
existing
done.
fencing, right, Scott?
What was that? Sorry.
That was the existing fencing when they moved the field, correct?
That's correct. They took the existing fencing that was probably 2 years old, and we moved it over there with some upgrades, obviously, because they can only move certain sections without damaging them. So
The fencing that you're talking about is other fencing than the batting cage that you discussed at the recreation. Am I correct?
batting cage is a totally different. That was mesh netting. It has nothing. This is galvanized fencing throughout the park. The only new fencing in that park is around the playground that was constructed and the baseball field that was moved. The rest of the fence was put in back in 2009 or 7 or whenever the the fencing was put in, and it was put in piecemealed, bits and pieces from Home Depot. No, the gauge wasn't thick enough, and now we're at a point where the fencing is a liability for a child that can climb up on it and possibly get impaled on it. So it's rusted, the poles are falling down, it's breaking off at all seams. Bob and his crew have to go up there weekly during the summer and tie it back up and move it around, and a strong windstorm knocks it down. We're at a point now where that fencing is definitely a liability.
Bev, go ahead.
If it's a liability, take it down before somebody gets hurt. Good God, don't Mickey Mouse it. And if you get a new fence, is this gonna have to get moved when they put irrigation in if that day ever comes? I
No,
don't
so the
wanna
fence,
do these 3 times.
the fencing is secure at this time, and we address it daily when the buildings and grounds goes up there and does their duties at the park on a daily basis. So between them and people, noticing things, it's good, but it's not good forever. So it's a constant maintenance issue right now that we need to address before it gets any worse.
Yeah.
And fencing will not interfere with irrigation at all, not even in the same field.
All right, thanks, Scott. Hey, folks, the select board handbook, section C12, to go past 10 p.m. during a meeting, whether it be joint or otherwise. I'm going to need a motion to continue the meeting past 10 o'clock.
So moved.
All right, thank you, Jeff.
Second.
Thank you, Tim. On the motion to extend the meeting beyond 10 o'clock, how do you vote, Jeff?
Yes.
Terry?
Ooh, yes.
Tim?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. I believe we left off with Mr. May had his hand up.
Yeah, I had loaded for that. But I just wanted to ask if I could, is there we've said that it's, let's say, not the fence behind here and it is the fence over here, but do we know how much fence it actually is? What fence it actually is?
Yes, we have a schematic of that. I can send you your
That I
board
haven't
that.
seen.
Okay, yeah, I can send your board that and the select board when we have the joint discussion on the irrigation and so forth.
Appreciate it.
If I can, Scott, I think it's going to be a select board business meeting.
Yes, yeah. Whatever meeting you guys put together, we'll send that information on.
Definitely want to make sure that the advisory gets that that info as well, because their input is valuable. All right.
If we could get that this week, Scott, because we have a meeting on Thursday.
Scott, can you do that?
Did you want it to the select board first, or did you want it to the advisory committee?
Send it to both.
Same time.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, all the questions were generated out of the joint meeting, so it's full disclosure. There's no need for any kind of who gets it first or otherwise. All right, there was a natural pause there. If there are no more, Scott, if you don't have anything else, or there aren't any other pressing questions from either the select board or the advisory committee, I'd like to move to that last. Adam, I think that last piece is a short piece, correct?
It will be. I'll just go through the warrant.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just before Scott leaves.
Sure.
This thing is in the 2010 annual town report. That the fall of 2009, the foundation for that concession stand was poured. A lot of this was done over the years with donations of material, time, labor, all of that stuff. So that's why one of the reasons there's a lot of lack of planning and stuff, because this was just rolling along like the wire, and it was done by volunteers and free this and that. But anyway, that's when the concession stand foundation was laid. In the 2011 town report, it comments that the artesian well was drilled, and so they could water the fields, set up some water lines, and a water reel purchased so some watering of the fields could be done automatically. Again, this is, old stuff. That's 2011. It's just been a piecemeal thing that was been done a lot on volunteers and donations from businesses. And I also looked at the September 10th, 2020. As far as the funding, it shows a table with $230,000 project cost, with 30,000 offset from school and rec, with 200,000 for CPC funding. I think later on, I have to watch it again, but I think there was a concern for from CPC to have some extra cushion in there because of COVID, the material cost, and so forth. So I think they ended up voting 230 plus to use the 30,000 from rec, school, and the Pajari fund as a cushion to offset possible increase in costs that you wouldn't know. And right now, materials costs are going through the roof. So if this gets voted in May, we'll have funding. Adam can go do the bid stuff, and by the time it comes back, who knows, 260 might not even be enough. But that's just a couple of things before Scott left that I thought I would toss out there. Case members of the board and stuff, various boards aren't aware of those details. Thank you.
You're correct, Jeff. I mean, that, like I said, the 230, now that the concession stand is out of the mix, that'll save us a little bit on that side if this does pass. That, like I said, we don't know with COVID and so forth, and the 30,000 offset from the school rec and the Pajari. Like I said, they roll that in there too. So,
okay, Mr. May, you had some comment on that.
Yeah, in my memory, because my memory was a little different, and I hate to contradict what I've just heard, but my memory tells me that what was said at that meeting was that they were concerned about the cost increases, but that Mr. Dill in his discussion reassured them by telling them that the 122 was the highest number they had for irrigation. The 70 something was the highest number they had for this, and the 35 was for the fencing, and it should cover it all. And that's where that was left, to my regard. So there we go with more confusion.
right, those are just estimates. No quotes. Those are just rough estimates.
Right, but I don't think it's 230. That's all I'm saying. It was approved at 200.
Okay, we all set?
Mr. Chair, I'm rabbit hunting again. The estimates were for the irrigation, a low of 74,000, a high of 122, and one in the middle was 101,000 for the irrigation. I wrote that down, so when I watched that meeting yesterday, my mind sometimes needs a little WD-40. So again, I don't want to go too far, but I'm hunting rabbits today, so I just thought I'd toss that back to my friend, Mr. May.
At least my 122 was on.
Adam, let's wrap this up.
Okay.
Last item on the agenda tonight is Adam's review of the warrant.
This is the warrant as of 3/15/2021. I wanted to share with you the latest one. So you'll notice it's a little bit different than the one that's in your budget book. As you can see, Article 1 here is not late bills. It appears that we do not have late bills, so that's some good news. This is the fiscal year 2021 operating budget amendments. Right now, Bob and I have been talking quite a bit. We believe 100,000 should be able to get us through our fiscal year 21 deficit. Holly's going through all the records in our office for litigation and collective bargaining costs that increased our legal services, but we will have to double check on that. Moving on to our consent agenda. It's a standard language for the most part on everything. You see plumbing and gas inspector fund and electrical inspector fund highlighted. Lori may need an increase there. Electrical, if you look at your latest BVA, is getting pretty close. We may have to do an adjustment. I put those numbers in. Those aren't final as of yet. So that's the only change really there. After our budget reviews, it seems like everything went fine with the sewer department operating budget for $1,304,100. The operation of the sewer department. Sewer capital project, fiscal year 22. They made some adjustments here from their original request. They adjusted downwards, so you're seeing the transformer of 30K and the recirc water system for 20,000. Both those went through capital. 22 cable department operating budget, looking at $222,505. There's a minor adjustment we made. We were able to make that work and fall within their operating budget. Okay, more deposits to our general fund stabilization and OPEB accounts. You see here 87,500 into our operating stabilization. With the deposit we had, we're right now at 862,000. This will bring us to $950,000 into our stabilization account, so nearly $1 million. Our CapEx 25,000 and our OPEB 12,500 of the 1.5.
Jeff, you'll be proud of me doing math in public, but these numbers follow our amended contributions targets. The 2% would be 24K and 8% would be 96K. So we're close to the new targets that we set.
Thank you. This is the funding of the community preservation accounts. This is what the CPC voted on. This one is on hold for now.
Yep. This
is the Community Preservation Act appropriation for the Baldwinville Elementary School project of the $1,174,000. Article 10 is rescission of authorized but unissued debt. I've been working with the treasurer collector here. This is one that we were able to get onto the annual town meeting. We will be having more of these coming up on your for the fall town meeting as we're working to clean up some house cleaning on some of our debt we still have that we never utilized. This was a landfill closure appropriation of the unissued debt from October of 1988. Templeton Scholarship Fund, 4K. The property valuation account, you probably saw the memorandum from the Board of Assessors in your budget book where they brought it from 22.5 to 20,000. They felt was a sufficient amount for this.
If there are any questions going through this, make sure you're writing them down and then issuing them to the town administrator. I know the advisory committee said that they're meeting later this week, and the select board will be meeting the week after to address any kind of questions. That way we don't go until 11 tonight. Go ahead, Adam. I'm sorry, Article 13.
This is to set the salaries of elected town officials.
Mr. Chairman, I just have one question. I see that the Sewers Commission is on, but I don't see either the Water or Electric Company Commission is on here, and they're elected officials. Why are they not on here?
That's a good question. Adam, I think we need to revisit why they would not be on there. It's an excellent question.
And that's something that we will work on.
Okay, thank you. Good point, Will.
Thank you.
Moving on to Council on Aging. This, I guess, back in 1976, they established the Council on Aging. For whatever reason, they didn't establish their purpose of how they will operate. The Council on Aging has since signed off on this with some minor adjustments to change like certain language, like the board of directors here and some other minors.
Yeah, I heard the full discussion when they had their meeting. If anyone wants to hear some of the descriptions of those, their last Council on Aging talked extensively about them. So it was a good meeting.
This is one of the Article 15. I know Terry brings up the ADA report quite often. This is one of the recommendations we received from the folks that worked, the experts that worked on our ADA plan, was the establishment of a disability commission.
Okay.
Our fiscal year 22 general fund operating budget of $9,903,495 with a transfer of $270,000 from ambulance receipts.
One question on 15. It doesn't say how many how many members of that commission. Is that set by the Mass General Law?
Yeah, that would be activating Section 8. If it's 8J, I guess the question would be, Will, whether we wanted to carry over the language of of Chapter 40 in that article. I thought the same thing.
And these were all vetted by town council as well. So
Okay.
if there's any specific,
Well, I mean, so you're saying you don't feel it necessary to actually, what would that commission look like if it's basically just mirrored out of MGL?
Yeah, right, exactly. How many members does MGL call for, or is this, or do we have to take and specify?
I don't think that's a bad suggestion, Will, to see if we can just add in some language that would at least define what it would look like, even if it's minimal.
Whether it's 3 members, 5 members, or whatever.
I agree.
I'll look into that.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, this was, the board instructed me to separate out. This is all the capital budget, rolling stock and improvements. Look at $468,500. These are all over 10,000 and meet all the criteria that went to the capital planning committee.
Correct.
So you have $458,500 coming from certified free cash and $10,000 coming from ambulance receipts. These that did not, they're just listed as special articles.
Yeah, it's based on funding. Got it.
Will this present a problem on that? Because I mean, I see in 3 departments on, what if somebody says, okay, I can understand the police, but I don't necessarily agree with the others. That could hold us up. Should we do a separate?
I believe that they should be all listed like this. Granted, town meeting could always separate them if they wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, there could be amendment, Will. I think that we could satisfy that with amendment.
Okay.
So if town meeting wanted to separate them, I think that would solve that. Okay, this is the trackless multi-purpose maintenance vehicle, well, AKA the sidewalk machine. This, the board discussed, is $213,750 or any sum lower, with $113,750 coming out of our capital stabilization and $100,000 from our certified free cash. This requires a 2/3 vote at town meeting because of the CapEx use. Okay, Monty Tech's assessment that they just went over, the 638,780 for fiscal year 22. NRSD for their assessment of $7,143,838 that they presented to you today. And then we've received a couple citizens petitions for fluoride warning on water bills and fluoride legislation. And that concludes our warrant.
That's all we have for warrant articles?
That's it.
Wow. That's probably the lowest number we've ever seen.
Yeah, it feels like it.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah, Adam, thanks for your work on that. And
I just have one more thing to share.
Okay.
Okay, then the policies. We were talking about this a while ago, but we decided to include this into the proposed amendment to our financial management policy. This was brought forward by Selectman Bennett, or Select Board Member Bennett, on year-end transfers. And I believe we discussed this, but I felt it'd be important to have this as part of our legislative and budget package for the end of year transfers. And our mentioned policy here, you can see it within the budget book, right on page number 15, and then my memorandum on page 14.
Okay. Did you need anything from this joint meeting tonight on that, or that's just informational?
More informational. I think we've already talked about it, but I think once
we have, yeah, we have. I think there was concurrence all the way through.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, that's all I have for you this evening.
All right, any go backs?
Mr. Chairman, just informational item, because I'm rabbit hunting tonight. AJ, the Disability Commission shall consist of not less than 5, no more than 13 members. So we can decide on a set of numbers. Just so I want Willis to
yeah, I like the idea. I think we could add in that text, but thanks for looking that up. It would be minimal to add that in. It was, we've done that several times with our bylaws, basically regurgitated what the state provisions were. So thanks for looking that up, Jeff.
So would I be looking at the lowest number of 5 members for the proposal to the town council?
He's laughing, probably, but
okay.
We just include the language, allow us the flexibility to have that. Holly, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask, how does this work with the building commissioner being the ADA coordinator? Would he need to work directly with that commission? Or would that title be changed?
I have some experience working with the disability from where I worked before I came here. Usually whenever there's an issue, the Disability Commission will alert the ADA coordinator. We'll talk about access and certain concerns or particular zones where they could see improvements. They work with them, but I don't.
Yeah, this is just formation, Holly. At that point, we'll have to figure out procedurally or policy-wise how that would occur.
It's all outlined in the law.
Is there any restrictions as to who can be on that particular commission? Like a member of, does it have to be a member of the select board or something like that, or what?
I don't know. Jeff gave numbers. Jeff, if you just copy paste what you see on the Mass Legislative website, yeah, just send it to Adam and we can determine how much should go in there. Good points by everybody. Adam, the idea of that is to make sure that you're basically giving the general description. What is the makeup and any special considerations?
I got my note here. Yep.
Okay, great. Any other go backs? All right, folks, thanks for a good and long and informational meeting. Yeah, it
Easy
is
for you to
10:20.
say.
Yep. Still 9 people watching on YouTube. I don't know how many people are eating popcorn watching at home, but again, good meeting. The select board's next meeting is March 24th. Advisory committee, I think you said you're meeting this week on Thursday.
That's correct.
Excellent. All right, Deb, as the leader of the AC this evening, if you want to go ahead and adjourn your committee. Select board, if I'll take a motion to
So moved.
Second.
Good job, Bennett.
Okay, on the motion to adjourn for the select board, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed?
No.
You're not opposed.
the
He's
majority-
not opposed.
One, no, Deb, I can't hear you. So the select board is adjourned. Advisory committee.
I'll make a motion that we adjourn since you can't hear Deb.
Okay.
So
I'll second
moved.
it.
All right, you got a motion in a second?
Yes.
Deb's get the thumbs up, so I think that's a positive.
All right.
Hey, aye.
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
Any opposed?
You slackers.
Hearing
Good
none.
job, all.
Hearing none. Both the committee and the board are adjourned. Thank you very much, folks. TCTV, we're good for ending the live stream, the recording, and the YouTube. Thank you very
Nice
much.
job, one and all.